I've had a couple people ask me on my opinion of some of this stuff because Brian is somebody that I've shared games with for probably somewhere in the ballpark of 15 years, maybe a little bit longer. We started Work to Game together a little over 6 years ago. And it came out of, I had dabbled in some Twitch streaming, whack with Dwarf Fortress over the years. Very excited for December 6th. And when I helped run the Dwarf Fortress wiki in college, I co-owned it with a friend who still owns it to this day. I bowed out of that when I got married a little over 10 years ago. And Brian and I really liked always talking about games. We both worked in jobs where we could be on the phone for portions of our workday. And while I was driving places in outside sales, I would talk to Brian sometimes for several hours at a time. And we would just talk about video games, what we wanted to see different, what we liked. And there are a lot we have in common, especially when it comes to MMORPGs. We agree a lot on what we want to see from the genre and how excited we are for what the genre can mean to people. However, when you start getting into the nitty-gritty, there are a handful of topics where we are strongly opposed. Now, we've always enjoyed the discussion for it, poking a little fun at each other sometimes. But, you know, as it's come time for him to leave Final Fantasy XIV, as that chapter of his life kind of closes, and he wraps up the remaining controller guides and kind of the commitments he's made to the community, and bows out for, you know, a while or forever, a lot of the reasons why are actually the exact same set of reasons that I am more excited to play Final Fantasy XIV than ever before. And so I think the differences between us have become more pronounced. And so some people have come in and said, can you talk about some of these points? Because they found that they disagreed with Brian. And I think it's one of the things people have always liked about Work to Game. You can always go follow Ginger Prime if you just prefer more of his opinions. You can always go follow Gaming Kinda if you just prefer more of my opinions. But ultimately, like, Work to Game was always meant to be a collaborative venture where our opinions can come together and we bounce off each other. And when we believe that something is really better for gaming as a whole, we can reiterate on each other and we can back each other up and we both stand for that. But on things where it's a lot more just an opinion in our minds and it's not about something like getting toxicity out of games or that more games is better or that more content creators is better, even if they're ones we disagree with. When you get to things like how party groups should work or how loot should work, we fundamentally disagree at a base level. And so I was asked on a couple of the points he made in this video. I haven't seen it. We're going to speed it up because it's an hour and 25 minutes base. So we are going to speed it up to, we're going to try 25% extra speed. And then this may take me multiple sessions, like when I watched Asmon and Lucky Ghost talk about Ashes of Creation, which is a game I'm trying to slowly become aware of. I'm trying to get to know all the facts. I quoted 111 nodes in another video, and somebody said they've actually already reduced that to 85, but the wiki still says 111, so like I'm trying to get to know that. Because the game hasn't released, it's not like, oh, we'll go play it and you'll get to know how it really works. You're trying to keep up on press releases. So I'll do my best on that. So let's dive in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. My name's Brian. If you happen to be new around here, but returning subscribers already know that they are amazing, and that's what they get for subscribing, by the way. Free compliments and extra greetings at the start of these videos. Now, I want to know more.
Okay, so this should just be her reacting to Ginger Prime about his post on what he likes about New World versus Guild Wars, and Brian's titled it what WoW and Final Fantasy players struggle to understand, which is just Brian being Brian when it comes to titles.
And so I'm happy that I was able to get that out for her to be able to make this video.
And he actually made it. That was fast.
There is talk of them collabing soon, maybe playing some New World and some Final Fantasy together, having a chat. Could happen.
I make content fast,
Yeah.
guys.
When I watched his I'm leaving goodbye video, I was like, damn, New World. That makes no fucking sense to me.
I don't think it makes a lot of sense to, like, especially depending on where you come from. The thing that I think it's important that a lot of people might not realize, especially within the 14 community, there's a large Final Fantasy XI community that has been waiting for more content. Like, whether they want to do something with 11 or bring in some more 11 style stuff into 14. And that's one of the things, like, we know for a fact Zepla has not played this game, right? And it's perfectly fine for her not to like the game, if she's played it, right? So it's like, at its core, I would be very curious to see is if Zepla decides at some point in the future, doesn't have to be soon, if she would step into New World and play for herself and give it a good opportunity, give it a chance to see if she resonates with anything in it. I see a lot of people saying my ideas sucked in WoW. I don't like World of Warcraft. I haven't enjoyed WoW, and I didn't like what Final Fantasy XIV copied from WoW. 14 being another WoW clone, according to Yoshi P's words. I've enjoyed the story. I enjoyed I wish there were things at 1.0 that lived and were able to be refined, but you know what? Like, they're not going to change 14 for me, nor should they. I don't want to be the content creator that ruins your fun.
I don't think that Yoshi P said it was going to be a WoW clone. I think he said we needed to look at why 1.0 failed and what the successful games of the time were doing, namely World of Warcraft. And so out of the gate, it came out learning a lot of what World of Warcraft did well. But to continue to call it a WoW clone today, even though I continually say they have a lot in common, I think at this point,
that can't be real.
It's not necessarily trying to become Shadowlands.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Why? Why would you pay
And
that?
So at this point, like, I think at that, you're saying that anything that mimics the qualities of World of Warcraft, which mimics the qualities of the games that came before it, is a WoW clone. So you're starting to use the word clone to represent an entire category of games. So you're starting to say that, like, every shooter is a GoldenEye clone. You're starting to say that every open world builder is like a Minecraft clone. You're starting to say every city simulator is a SimCity clone. And that's not really fair. I think clones, in my mind, are people that are trying to do like a reskin. So we're going to take like Disney branding and we're going to release it over an existing game with all the same mechanics in all the same ways to get our piece of the money for people that want to give it to somebody for a different set of cosmetics or underneath a different publisher's name. There are true clones out there, and they don't move gaming in any meaningful direction. They don't extend the boundaries, right? They don't push out what's capable. They don't double down on existing qualities in ways that move them to quality or quantity levels we've never seen before. Final Fantasy XIV is a narrative-based MMO. That is, by its very nature, a fundamental difference with how World of Warcraft came out of being a world in which to explore an RTS. They're not clones. That's a weird clone. If anything, they are siblings. They are very much from the same upbringing, but they have gone about life very, very differently. My brothers are identical twins, and they are very different people, even though they entered the world on the same day. So that's just not... I can already see why people wanted me to talk about this. I've already watched her post on this. So this is mostly me talking about Brian. It ended up last time me just focusing on how great Guild Wars is, because it's a lot of what they describe. But I do think there's some word choice here. And so there's already just going to be a difference in the way Brian and I communicate. But thankfully, a lot of you guys like that. That's why you're here. That's why people like T-Shaw supporting us for 2 months are here.
That's just not fun for anybody.
It would be great if he could make a video that explains why New World instead of Final Fantasy. Why would you do that? I do not.
I want to first... say thank you so much for all the loving and wonderful comments on my Goodbye to Final Fantasy XIV video. It really was nice to sit down and read and have those discussions and get that input and get that insight from
Did
the
he
wider
say
Final Fantasy.
he was doing it for the kids? Yeah, he said he also has 5 kids. So that's all. That's really all the reason that he needs.
We
I
should
said that
increase that
yesterday,
score.
A couple days ago, like seriously, he could have actually just made a video like, "Hey guys, I'm leaving Final Fantasy 14 because I have 5 kids. Goodbye." And like everyone would be like,
Yeah.
"We salute you." Okay, do whatever you need to do.
Fantasy 14 community.
Oh,
So
let's make that
thank you
6
so much
kids
for
now, by the way.
being so loving and so, I guess, generous.
He had not announced then, so he is pregnant with number 6. Well, he's not. His wife is. So it is an ever-growing number.
Coming soon.
And hopefully you guys understand.
And I also have, FF14 is made for WoW refugees. Like that was, both those things were weird to me. And
It's such a... It's like... It's going to be so interesting to see over the course of time, because I wonder if that changes. I wonder if we see more people, more content creators feel that. Because honestly, I don't know, like maybe they don't read the comments, etc. But it's going to be interesting for me to watch what happens next, right? Because it feels like there's kind of a privileged tower that a lot of people get to speak from, in that regards. And it's like, no, I'm not retracting those statements at all. But maybe that's just my part, in being, flawed and trying to, have discussions with that side of the community. Maybe we should just all ignore them 100% and never engage with them. And maybe that's what everybody else does. I never felt good doing that, but unfortunately that's what had to happen. You just kind of have to block or mute, or in my case, I built some filters so that common phrases that they like to try and sprinkle in, I just don't see anymore. Missed the mark on. Final Fantasy 14 1.0 actually has a lot of what I'm going to share with you today, but it really did.
So I didn't play FF11.
Yeah,
and,
no joke.
Only one thing that I know about FF11. What I know about FF11 is that it had a boss that caused vomiting and took 18 hours to beat. Yeah.
There's a part of me that really wishes that they invested in Final Fantasy 11. Really helped continue to invite people into Vana'diel, into a player-driven economy, into the social kind of aspect. Guild Wars 2, I think, does it by far the best out of the current set in terms of those who are out there. But Guild Wars 2 also has this weird-ass content release policy in which that you never know if you're going to get an update or not. It turns out now they have an expansion. And I hope to see that and what they do with that in the long term of that franchise, because there's a lot that I love about Guild Wars 2. I have multiple characters in Guild Wars 2 that are all level capped 80. I haven't done any what people, like the legendary guides. I end up getting in this weird habit of just I'll level up another character, which traditionally I don't like characters or games where I'm more or less playing alts. I do prefer the the one character, multiple ways of playing that character preference. That ends up being kind of more like my style. But I do enjoy Guild Wars 2, and they do offer a lot of that. But Final Fantasy 11, her referencing kind of
he doesn't end up liking any of the grinds in in Guild Wars 2, which is crazy because they are one-time grinds. They feel very good that when you complete something, you are done. You are done. And so it feels weird to me that he doesn't get drawn to that. He doesn't do map completion. He doesn't do the raiding. He doesn't have ascended gear, which is a chance to have best-in-slot gear. It can be purchased. You can earn it from any number of sources. All of the ascended gear is equivalent with each other. He hasn't started a legendary. He hasn't unlocked any of the grindier mounts. And so it feels so odd to me that we talked about liking Guild Wars and that he wants these things from 11, but that he hasn't engaged in any of those things that he's calling for. So it doesn't shock me that he hasn't picked to do them in WoW or 14, because he's never made it to cap in WoW, and in 14 he feels that those things result in nothing. He feels that if you get raid gear, that gear just becomes expired. And he wants gear that lasts, and it doesn't last long enough to justify it for him. So his favorite time to get geared up is the 0.5 patch, because it's relevant till the 0.0. From my standpoint, there's an argument to go the other way, because I know with 0.0 they're going to hand me gear from every quest giver. So that's just a mentality difference, but either way, he doesn't like the vertical progression element. And so it always surprises me when he brings up liking Guild Wars that he's made it to level cap, but anybody who's played Guild Wars for a long time, because level cap has stayed the same since Tyria, that's just a really small thing. It just doesn't matter.
We've heard these horror stories. There's so much beauty in Vana'diel. There's so much beauty in that struggle. Every level was fighting for. And beyond just that, though, one of the things that a lot of people, I always want to be clear, there's no way that a Final Fantasy 11 game, the way that it was in classic server era, would be able to have the mass market appeal that a game like Final Fantasy 14 requires in terms of its development. But what I would love to see is more.
What did he say?
Guild Wars 2, and they do offer a lot of that. But Final Fantasy 11, her referencing kind of we've heard these horror stories. There's so much beauty in Vana'diel. There's so much beauty in that struggle. Every level was fighting for. And beyond just that, though, one of the things that a lot of people, I always want to be clear, there's no way that a Final Fantasy 11 game, the way that it was in classic server era, would be able to have the mass market appeal that a game like Final Fantasy 14 requires.
What's the definition of mass market appeal? Because Final Fantasy XI wasn't that big then. Isn't RuneScape? It's number 13 out of 137 MMOs. In 2022, it is approaching levels that put it on par with 2013. Not to mention, Wrath of the Lich King Classic. So I don't know what his definition of mass market appeal is, because like I already fundamentally disagree with that. Because relative to other MMOs, like I would say number 13 is pretty freaking good. Pretty freaking good. Considering I don't think Final Fantasy XI was above that. Maybe it was just through there weren't that many MMOs then, but like MMOs is already a niche portion of gaming. So within MMOs, if you are commercially successful, you're doing great. You're doing great. So I do think there are grindy games like that. Absolutely I do. But he doesn't play any of those. Like, he doesn't play RuneScape. He doesn't play WoW Classic. He has an 11 account, but I don't know how much time he spends on that. And there's private service for 11, so like I don't agree.
In terms of its development. But what I would love to see is more cohesiveness between all of what Final Fantasy XIV was. It's a very siloed game, which from a development cycle, they've really prioritized pushing out content and getting updates to players. That's not a bad thing. But at the end of the day, all of a sudden you start looking at it years and years and years later, they release like Island Sanctuary, which is just off in its own little corner at levels, level cap. You have to beat the MSQ just to get into this, but then it doesn't have any else value, which I guess makes sense in terms of the fact that it is locked behind MSQ. That it's like it couldn't, because then all of a sudden you're sending everybody else who doesn't have access to it, much like housing. Like you start to kind of see the cracks that that Final Fantasy XIV has, and there's value in those cracks. They were able to like do good things with those, but at its core, like I come from Final Fantasy XI. I don't come from World of Warcraft. Everybody's critique of my feedback is all driven and rooted in I never played 11, World of Warcraft, blah 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 blah. Like F World of Warcraft, I don't give two craps about that game. Like I just don't. I've tried it. I haven't got into it. I'm curious about the updated controller support, namely because of some reason, like my guides on diving into the controller with WoW have been, or what people reference, and there's a value that I get, a joy I get in helping people. I've always wanted to be a teacher. I could never figure out how to be a teacher and have kids and a family in terms of what we were wanting to do in life. But yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. It's unfortunate that. It's unfortunate, like it's a language issue that we're having here. It's an absolute language issue in terms of where people get rooted and where they come from. You wish that they made Final Fantasy XI story entirely offline soloable. A part of me would love to see something in terms of that, like you maybe do like a kind of a sprite-based Octopath Traveler Final Fantasy XI story. That would be so cool. Like they don't need to be in that online space, but a part of me also, a frustration that I had recently in Square Enix, is this was the 20th anniversary of Final Fantasy XI. They said they were working on something big. I tried to set my expectations in the gutter, and they somehow delivered less than my expectations. They somehow delivered less than my expectations for Final Fantasy XI this year. And I was like, I was really crushed by that. I was really kind of hoping for something more. If they brought in Vana'diel to Final Fantasy XIV, I would love to see what that would look like. I would love to see the one sub model brought in. And they said they might be working on that. So there are rays of hope. But a part of what I gathered from the interviews is that they don't even know what they want or what they need to do with it. And then you go and you start playing New World, and it's like, New World is giving me a lot of these Final Fantasy XI feelings. It's giving me a lot of this Final Fantasy XI sense. It's tying into my childhood in a way. It's delivering on all these things. And the thing is I'm not looking for a perfect game. I'm not looking for a perfect MMO. There is no utopian MMO out there, right? But all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. Like, I still want to see more Final Fantasy XI in 14. And it gets siloed as a part of Eureka and Boja. And that just makes me go like, why can't the whole experience be like this? Or I know I'm the minority, right? I know that. Like, I know the numbers. Like, people who ask me.
So why can't the whole experience be in that one way? One of the things that Final Fantasy does very, very well, that's very easy to overlook if you are happy with the current tier of content. If you are in the current tier of Savage, if you're working on the current tier of Relics, if you're in the current Island Sanctuary, if you're doing current things, or you're is that imagine there is a day that a Final Fantasy XIV patch runs out of things that interest you, either because when it drops, it doesn't have that many things that interest you, or because you've gotten to play so much during that patch cycle that you're pretty caught up. It happens from time to time, especially in the longer running patch cycles. People feel pretty caught up, and one of the things Final Fantasy XIV does very, very well that allows its subscriber base to stay consistent is that we can always go backward. One of my 2023 goals is to clear my first ultimate. Those ultimates are still around. So the reason you cannot introduce a system now, regardless of the system, Final Fantasy XI, a new 14 system, it doesn't matter. You cannot introduce a system now that sweeps over the entire game, is because it will break all of that other stuff. And so World of Warcraft does this every expansion. They take a Eureka Bosja style system, like what he's describing, and they let it sweep over that entire expansion. And what it means is when we move on to the next expansion and we leave that Eureka Bosja system behind, or we carry it into its next iteration, like Bosja Zadnor, then what ends up happening is now the previous version doesn't really make sense anymore, and there's no way to go back. And so now those raids require you to have been using lost actions or some crap like that, and those die. Now you have ultimates that require stuff that people haven't done, or end up in weird states. And so you end up where you end up with a large amount of gatekeeping. You end up with a lot of, you have to go do this just for the sake of it. To unlock this, it acts as some sort of attunement, and so the easiest thing to do is just move things into an unsynced state, and that is what World of Warcraft has done. There is no way, the time walking system and all that was all put in later. It has no way to act as graceful as the syncing and minimum item level system within Final Fantasy XIV. So what he's asking for is one of the reasons 14 took over from the Final Fantasy XI era games, that they have allowed themselves to welcome in new players into the same space that has veteran players, and that's something that the previous generation of MMOs really struggled with. The previous generation of MMOs, like World of Warcraft going from Classic into the Burning Crusade, was you need to blitz through the previous content to get caught up. And so it becomes very, very hard for games, unless they're going to be lateral games, it becomes very hard for that. But I think Final Fantasy is really good at that, and that's why it's not necessarily that a Final Fantasy XI style system can't come into 14. It's that what he's calling for is anything added to it. Criterion, Island Sanctuary, it's always going to be siloed for the protection of the rest of the game.
For full loot PvP stuff, like that's just there's no numbers there, you know. But then yeah, so here we exist in that. So let's see what she has to say, because there were some insane things that happened in 11. MMO out there, right? But all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. Like, I still want to see more Final Fantasy 11 in 14. And it gets siloed as a part of Eureka and Bosja. And that just makes me go like, why can't the whole experience be like this? Or I know I'm the minority, right? I know that. Like, I know the numbers. Like, people asking for full loot PvP stuff. Like, that's just, there's no numbers there, you know? But then, yeah, so here we exist in that. So let's see what she has to say, because there were some insane things that happened in 11. There's a lot of beauty there. And as a 11 player, honestly, I think maybe some of this is pettiness. But like when people sit here and talk about WoW, and it's like, yeah, like being popular doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing. Like, at least for some of us, right? Yes, WoW had way more numbers. WoW defined the language. WoW disrupted the MMOs. It made it accessible to more people in an era where there wasn't that much online gaming. But now, what the hell is an MMO, and even to begin with in the first place? People, like, companies, because of trying to keep people subscribed and engaged, have really burned the dopamine, have really just overextended. And so, like, stepping into something like New World and having, like, not sitting here being thrown with daily login bonuses and all these chores that you have to do just so you can finally get to the thing that you want to do. Like, no, it's effing organic, and it just feels fun and a fun place to exist in.
Okay, just to be clear, with New World, his argument for New World is that what New World is doing that the other games didn't.
People subscribed and engaged have really burned the dopamine, have really just overextended. And so, like, stepping into something like New World and having, like, not sitting here being thrown with daily login bonuses and all these chores that you have to do just so you can finally get to the thing that you want to do. Like, no, it's effing organic, and it just feels fun and a fun place to exist in. It's a fun place to exist in, and I'm so happy to be part of it. But yeah.
Okay, so the way New World does events is New World absolutely burns the dopamine. So New World does a thing called Twitch drops, obviously being owned by Amazon, Twitch being owned by Amazon. You can go watch the game and get excited about the game. They pair this with fresh start servers. They pair this with expanded zones, new content launches, and then they pair this with all sorts of events, and then they discount the game to encourage returning players, to encourage new players. So, like, the dopamine hits are still here. This is a heavily marketed game. New World is probably one of the largest marketing campaigns as far as just relentless, constant marketing I have seen outside of the mobile gaming space. The ability to take a percentage of your income and just designate it to constant, relentless, wide-scale marketing across advertising, across platform-specific, across creator partnerships, across in-game referral systems. Like, until we get to something where Ashes of Creation has this, like, single-gen MLM scheme or whatever, where you can, like, refer and, like, get paid out if your friend plays. Like, until we get to that, New World is setting the bar on what you can do as far as the sheer quantity of marketing you can put into a game. World of Warcraft does big marketing blitzes, they do refer a friends, they do loyalty campaigns, and they have dopamine hits. But New World takes all of that stuff that blends and takes it all out of the gameplay and just shoves it out in the world. The idea that they're fostering a Twitch community and things like that, not because people want to come in and watch the game being streamed, but because people want to come in and get drops. As somebody that's taken part in these events, they're very fun. I'm having an absolute blast in the current New World event, but there is a very large percentage of people that come into chat and the only thing they type all day is exclamation point drops. That's it. That's all they type. And when I go hang out in the bigger New World streams during these events, the only other thing they type is, do you have any codes? How do I get the drops? It's drops, 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 drops. There is absolutely a dopamine hit in this game. And there will continue to be more drops, more drops, more drops. So, like, there is a dopamine hit to this game. They are absolutely marketing. They're just doing it differently because their retention is around, how do I get people to return to the game and drive up viewership so that people will download the game for the first time, because that's where the money is. In World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, it's a subscription-based game, and so the money is in keeping players, not in getting new players. So it's just a shift in its monetization is what's driving these boats. But I think saying Brian and I have always been very pro subscription model. So if Brian and I are very pro subscription model, that means there will be retention mechanics. And my understanding is, having never played 11, that there were retention mechanics in that as well. But retention mechanics are common in games that are looking at a constant flow of money from existing people. Growth mechanics are common in games that are trying to collect all their money up front. Follow the money.
Yeah, it's not like, gosh, I wish Zepla had a Final Fantasy XI core in her somewhere that you could tap into, because I think we're going to vastly disagree. I think we're going to be speaking French and German this entire video.
So what kind of worries and fears influence the development of 1.0?
So when you look at 1.0, when you look at the leave system, when you look at how the game was ultimately structured, at that time, those articles are being posted. News media is literally just going ham. And so the game companies, like, they would have in Final Fantasy XI when we log in, please don't forget your family, your lives, your wives, and your work, and all these things. Like, we know this is an addictive experience. It's another life, another world kind of experience, another existence, another plane. The thing is that the original MMOs were the metaverses. Like, if you look at the buzzword, the term there, the original MMOs were the metaverses. Now the MMO scene has more evolved into, just like everything else, a multiplayer online RPG. The massive, or whatever you would define as that, and everybody's going to have your own definition. You don't need to agree with me, but ultimately, like, the idea where you can kind of hop in, hop out. You don't want to live there. You don't want to exist there. You don't want to, like, heck, if, like, one of the things, like, I remember Sponge, who's here, talking about, like, in Star Wars Galaxies, like, literally, like, I am just going to do this thing. I play this game and I run this shop, and that is the experience that I'm looking for in that experience. those are obviously times of the past, but at this time in Square Enix's development, you kind of have two voices, and you can see it in the leave quests themselves. You had this arbitrary 36-hour cooldown window. You only had so many they wanted. So they wanted you to come in. They had the fatigue system. They wanted you to come in, but they didn't want you to play too much. You know, it was like, we want you to check in on our game every now and then, but oh God, you know, like, please don't play too much. Please don't play too much. And then ultimately what happened was, oh, well, people are just going to go back and play the game that they already were playing. And they did that in droves on top of the other issues that 1.0 had. Now, as Yoshi P and the team refined the 1.0 series, it kept getting better and better and better. More social, more fun, like more of these things. And it was also building up to what they were talking about with 2.0. So it was a really exciting time to be a part of it. And they removed some of these like arbitrary time-based restrictions in this regards. And that's where it's like, even the concept of the dailies, why they rail against that. They're not good for culture. They're not good for your brains. Like, they are bad design. They're a bad design because they're acting like a drug on your system. So you get addicted, and then eventually you get pissed. Ultimately, everybody I talk to gets to the same point where you're like, F this. Final Fantasy 14 did a decent job because they kind of gave you the dailies and then they let you finish them. Like, there was an end point that you could do, but it's still that arbitrary mechanic. And I would argue over dailies, that's where player-driven economies really benefit, because if you want to go do something, go do something. And if you want to take advantage of it for yourself, you do, or you add that value to the market, right? We're all kind of participating in this bigger thing that none of us can do on our own. It's a global thing that we're all working towards on these goals. And that's something I think really special, really interesting. And it's such a cool thing to be a part of. And economics does that. Anyway, we'll let that.
So what about everything he just said matters for the difference between New World and any other MMO? I think what he's arguing against is retention mechanics for the sake of retention, which a lot of retention mechanics are to reward people for being around. So you can view it as a positive or you can view it as a negative, but it's the same idea, right? A fatigue system in like Final Fantasy XI or a rested XP system like what is in modern MMOs is effectively the same thing. You are getting less reward for playing more often. And it is meant to be a catch-up mechanic for everybody that can't play as often, and meant to make people who do play as often feel like you could dial it back a peg. So that's the same. And New World has it too. New World has rested. New World has these big campaigns towards pushing stuff like that. It's the same. So like that is still present. As far as player economy, a player-driven economy does not encourage the balance he's talking about. The lack of retention, first of all, retention absolutely exists. There are these boards that refresh every certain number of hours. Like, there is that. But let's just assume for a moment what he's arguing is the player economy elements of New World. Once we acknowledge that all MMOs have retention mechanics, it just varies how many of them they have and how relevant they are to current in-game. Player-driven economy, he argues, allows you to take breaks. That's just not true. If you want to stay relevant in a player-driven economy, the person who is more actively involved in the market board, the person who is more actively involved in acquiring items, whether they are doing it with capital or they are actually out in the process of doing those, will make more. And so if your goal becomes to make more relevant to another, relative to another player, the person who puts in more will get more. So they can either do it through more time, or they can do it through being more optimal in the time they have. If they both reach peak optimal, it's the person with the more time wins. There is nothing about a player-driven economy that encourages people to take breaks. The most player-driven economy I have ever played is EVE Online. EVE Online has so many systems of player interactivity online that the game progresses with you offline, and that doesn't feel good. And so my friends that I played EVE Online with, who got way more into EVE Online than I did, they got to where they were running a dozen or more accounts. They had it on their second monitor during work all day. They have ships that you work towards that when you log out, stay there. And if people find them, they can be destroyed. And so players work and take shifts managing those ships. So they are always doing something or are always protected. You get text messages that tell you to hop online and you need to be available. The only other games I've played like that are mobile games where they ping me so often that it's meant to come straight to my phone. player-driven economies are more time, not less time. So it sounds like at first he's arguing that World of Warcraft introduced retention mechanics. No, retention mechanics have just been in games. And they've been there. I think WoW inherited them from wherever they came from, and every game has them. New World has them as well. So I don't think that really moves the conversation forward in like what New World's doing that Final Fantasy and WoW aren't, because they're all guilty of it. You're all guilty. And if you don't like it, tough luck. It's just in MMORPGs. It's in all of gaming. Any game that benefits from you being online a month from now versus now has a retention mechanic. So if it is not a single player, one-time playthrough, you already paid them and you're done, there are retention mechanics, period. So once we toss that out, his argument is player-driven economies allow you to take those breaks. And it is exactly the opposite. A true player-driven economy will always benefit the person who puts in more time. Always. Now, he may choose not to care about that, but in that case, why does he need a player-driven economy? If your argument is, well, then I just don't care, then it doesn't matter. If you're just going to disengage the moment that it puts something negative on you, it doesn't matter. So if your argument is that something matters, then it should be something that all players feel that they benefit from engaging in, and player-driven economies benefit the person who puts in the most time.
Will continue. And what I've seen happen over the course, especially the last 10 years, more friction between the two, where in a player-driven economy, economics really solves a lot of player friction because it...
So how is the player economy in New World different from the player economy?
The player economy doesn't exist in New World. It's a player-driven economy in New World versus a player economy. There are two, and that word driven is a key difference maker. It is a key difference maker. No, 14 does not have a player-driven economy. It has maybe elements of it. Like if, Chili being in chat talking about like raid food and raid, potions. Like you want to have those aspects and those options because that's going to help make the difference in clearing said raid for said time. But why can't you craft the gear? And it's also tied into Final Fantasy XIV's gearing system being a stat stack. People keep saying like, oh, people buy the ultimates clears in Final Fantasy XIV. Like that's the reality. Like I know people who have literally paid money, done this and gone forward, anyway, we're just going to move on because I'm just going to get mad at that. So I don't, are people feeling like there's no other way around it? No, like it happens. Right. But the gear in and of itself, just being a stat stack, just having that power behind it and having only one real avenue and then everything else being a time gated avenue. Why can't crafters and gatherers be a part of that system? Why can't they be more a part of that system? And then also when you look at that system as it tiers up because of how it's siloed and structured, why aren't low-level materials? Like, why isn't there a value for a new player going around and gathering those materials, having an impact on the end game, having the end game actually begin at level 1, as opposed to having kind of these, Jenga towers continue to be built on top of each other? And so that's essentially, there's a real core difference in terms of a driven, the key word is driven, versus a player economy. Player trade does not necessitate a player-driven economy.
So I understand his argument to be that because some very small percentage off-platform exchanges in-game or out-of-game resources for somebody else to play their account or for them to be carried through something, though ultimates are really hard to carry, so odds are it's somebody playing their account, that now ultimate is devalued. I do think that's a very small percentage, so I think that's a bit of a fringe answer. I think you're kind of straw-manning that. But his argument is that crafters and gatherers need to be able to impact the end game from a very low level. And so players should be able to engage in the true end game from a very low level. The reason that can happen in New World is because it's new. So in Classic, or in Vanilla, you could find items at level 10, level 20, level 30, level 40 that had value to max level characters because you were still in the same expansion. So to give New World credit for this implies that he should always play games that are in their first expansion, because the first game, where the expansion word gets thrown out as first expansion, but it's not an expansion, it's the base game. And so he should only play base games. And when New World moves into its expansion, and let's say they decide to increase the level cap, to 70. They're going to increase all the skill caps to 300, and everything in the new zones are going to be from level 200 to 300, and all of the monsters are going to be from level 60 to 70, and they're going to drop a whole new round of loot and a whole new type of weapons that are all going to function differently. They're going to operate off new things. We're going to get away from rabbits, and there's going to now be, I don't know, giant rats, and we're going to skin the rats, and we're going to get away from turkeys and peacocks, and we're going to instead move into some other animal entirely that drops a different type of meat. We're going to be harvesting giant spiders, and spider meat's going to be the thing that steps in for that. Because what will happen is all the stuff from the last expansion will lose value. It will lose value. Or you will have the new zones drop it in such quantities. This is how Final Fantasy XIV kind of solves like their shards and crystals and stuff, where the rabbits in the new zone will be so big that they'll drop 100 rabbit meat, and the beginning zones will drop 2, 1 to 4. And so, yes, a new player technically generates the same item that's valuable, but the new zones are making, you know, light rations for level 70 players that are consuming 200 food per ration. And so it doesn't, like, the new player is still not getting paid out. So a lot of what he's arguing here is that is comparing what happens after a game ages. He's comparing about what happened. It has nothing to do with Final Fantasy XIV. It has nothing to do with World of Warcraft. It has to do with what happens when a game ages, specifically games that have a vertical progression system. So he's talking about it like it's a player, like it's an economy issue, that there is something that is economically different about New World versus Final Fantasy. And there are things that are economically different, mostly because of the way the market boards work, because of the way inventory works, because of how wide an item ID can be used. So the fact that like one type of item can be used across like so many things. So like the rabbits from all the zones are all the same, as opposed to Final Fantasy XIV very much silos its resources. So you end up with particular resources that if they're not used in raid consumables, they may be from this expansion and they're not worth a lot. So Final Fantasy XIV does silo off where the player economy is taking place. And there are things about the economy that I don't like. There are things about it that actively push down that player-driven portion that he's talking about. But I think that's intentional. I think that's by design, that they don't want the economy to be the driving element. There are things about an economy-driven game that are also bad. It's not all goods. And so, like, I don't think it's... Final Fantasy XIV doesn't know how to do it. I think at this point it's a design feature, not a bug. But a lot of what he's arguing as far as how New World's doing it aren't really the elements of what I think New World is doing better economically. He's arguing that crafters are relevant, and the reason crafters are relevant has a lot to do, and gathering being relevant, that everything you do provides value, and that's because we're not at a point where there's things that are generated in New World that people don't still need. There will be a lot of item IDs that New World has that will fall by the wayside once the game has been running longer than a year. It's in its second year right now. For example, even in Guild Wars, which is a lateral progression system, so it keeps a lot of things relevant long after they're introduced, all gear below exotic for level 80 is trash. And that is because the game has been out so long that exotic has become this base level of gear that nothing else matters. That's the second highest gear level you can get, and that is so widely prevalent that anything other than that doesn't matter. So a lot of what he's arguing has to do with just how new it is. And the fact that he says crafters aren't able to craft raid relevant stuff at all is just a lack of understanding how the gearing system works within raiding, because he doesn't engage in it. Because Mr. Appy and Sia have talked about, like, when they go on their alts, they go do it in crafted gear. The current Savage tier is clearable entirely with potions, food, gear, and materia melds that are all acquired from crafters and gatherers. If you are doing your weekly hunts for materia, or you just go buy it off the market board and you use your crafters and gatherers to gather up all the resources and then meld all that gear, you can clear all current Savage content in Final Fantasy XIV. All of it. So to say they're not relevant is just not true. They are. They're not the best, but if you're not using a DPS meter, and you're getting clears, who cares? And since DPS meters are against the rules, who cares? He's choosing to ignore just how relevant crafters are. Crafters are unbelievably relevant in Final Fantasy XIV when it comes to clearing Savage. That doesn't mean that it's a player economy driven game. It's just a weird way to push that argument. Because, like, player-driven economy has to span beyond just clearing the current Savage content. Player-driven economies, in my mind, are when you talk about something like EVE Online, where every element of somebody's day is impacted by a crafter. You're buying ammo for weapons, you're buying the weapons themselves, you're buying the equivalent of armor, you're buying your ship. Everything you're buying is generated by a player. That's not true in New World. In New World, you're getting an enormous amount of currency and faction rep from the faction boards, which is an NPC-driven thing. You're funneling it into cities that, while they are player-run, are ultimately an NPC-driven element. So there are a ton of things in New World where I was doing my MSQ quests, and it was giving me all sorts of rewards as far as experience and currency. There are a lot of things I'm doing in New World that are not player-driven. They are NPC-driven. So when it comes to completing quests and all of that currency being added into the game, that's not player-driven. So I think I disagree with his stance on the point, but I also disagree with his reasoning, and they're two different things. I think his reasoning is completely independent. His reasoning is that crafting is not relevant in endgame. And he prefers player-driven economies. And I don't think crafting being relevant in endgame is what dictates whether or not something is a player-driven economy.
In a game like Final Fantasy XIV. Like, obviously having a player-driven economy is fantastic, and it's needed in the MMO, but doesn't FF14 have that?
Nope.
He said that, like,
it does not.
Casual players are out collecting and grinding and gathering that for the hardcore players to use, but I'm thinking, like, in a raiding environment, if you're a hardcore raiding environment, you usually do have designated people on the team that are out there doing the crafting and gathering.
And that is the real difference maker. She exactly just admitted to the one of my biggest frustrations in this raid logging, raid mindset, is that it isn't a social experience. It is a very limited and team focused experience, and you literally put people on this aspect. There is no reliance on John Q, somebody over there in the corner, being this asynchronous system. In fact, it actually, by not having this, it reduces empathy for others, because others are costing you time as opposed to others are saving you time. It really comes down to a core principle economic idea. Are people a cost, or are people an opportunity? If a person is an opportunity, it has the ability to build empathy towards one another, and you work together, whether you are working together step and step, or are you working together in an asynchronous passive way? I'm contributing, but I don't have to be on this team, and my contribution might be even less, but it doesn't matter. There's an opportunity here. And these non-player driven economies, people are a cost. They're a cost. They're slowing you down in your raid. They're slowing you down. They're impacting you. They're making it harder for you to do the thing that you need to do. Players should be an opportunity. They should not be a cost. And that's what the raid mindset builds in. It frustrates the crap out of me, because, like, I'm all for people having raids. I'm all for even having trophies behind that clear to showcase your talent. But when they also then lock the power behind that, especially because there aren't any perks, there's no real other thing, the gears are just now these glamour pieces, it is, in my mind, a very frustrating system to be a part of.
Okay, so now we've moved outside of economy. So he pointed out in an earlier thing that word choice matters. And so if we're going to go on the element that word choice matters, he's using the word economy very, very broadly. Very broadly. It is no longer just like fiscal. It is no longer just the financial definition of that. He's using economy much more broadly. We're talking about supply-demand concepts. We're talking about all these things. He's now using economy to encompass everything in the game, where you now are dealing with player interaction. And does something one player does improve or hurt another player's progress? So now this becomes an argument for or against, should MMORPGs have solo elements that are not impacted by or impact others? Not should they have solo things you can do. He said asynchronous was fine, but what that means is when you gather something, does that impact other people? When you build something, does that impact other people? Whether you did it all by yourself or you did it with a group, does some choice you make, the quest you accept, the quest you complete, does that interact with other people? In Final Fantasy XIV, it does not. Your MSQ progress does not impact other people. How many Arxidara quests you do in Thavnir does not impact anybody else whatsoever. Whether or not you are on a hunt train doesn't impact anybody. Nothing you do in Final Fantasy XIV impacts another player's outcome outside of your direct interaction with them. The number of raid clears last week has no effect on the number of raid clears there will be this week. Unless you are directly interacting, you are in their group, you are chatting with them, there is nothing in Final Fantasy XIV that dictates somebody else. And they are getting further away from that than closer. One of the handful of ways that we interacted with each other was through dungeons. As you clear the mandatory solo story through Final Fantasy XIV, there are breaks every couple levels to run a mandatory multiplayer piece of content in 4 or 8 person groups, and a rare case of 24-man groups. And when you do those, you will be paired with other players. That was a mandatory portion of the game. So calling it a solo player game with an MMO overlay was not fair, because somebody who liked solo player Final Fantasies would get very low level. They would get to the very first dungeon and you go, whoa, 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 you said I could play this by myself. Now I have to have 3 other people? But you don't anymore. They've now gone back and given an AI alternative path. It's a little bit slower in my opinion, and a little bit, I prefer the player interaction, so I don't prefer it. But there is now an option to say, you know what, I'm going to go over here and go with the AI. And they are slowly building that system out with the objective of making sure that you could get all the way to current content, and that any piece of mandatory content would be clearable with AI if you chose. So the handful of times that player interaction is encouraged in Final Fantasy XIV, they are getting rid of. So there is nothing in Final Fantasy XIV where the choices you make have to interact with other people. They only happen when you choose to. Optional exploratory zones, optional community content such as maps, hunts. There are plenty of ways to find player interaction, but none of it happens by force. New World, however, is the opposite. New World, everything you do matters. When you are doing quests, whether it is going off and fishing by yourself, chopping down logs by yourself, PvPing, running dungeons with groups, it affects faction standings, it affects things like that, and so you are helping either build or tear down a portion of the map being controlled by what Final Fantasy would call a grand company. This idea that you've aligned yourself with a faction that is NPC driven, and that you are going to push that standing up or down in the world. And while you will gain things for yourself, you'll gain gold, you'll gain rep, you'll gain things for yourself, that ultimately many of the choices you make will dictate the amount of progress that other people are experiencing. So it is a huge amount of player interaction. And so somebody trying to complete a quest, it benefits you that they complete that quest, whether or not you participate. It benefits you. Unless it's PvP, in which case you guys fighting each other benefits someone. Because now we're talking about PvP, which fosters a certain level of interaction. The pros of that is that now every time you see somebody in the game doing something, it feels good. Right now I'm participating in the New World event on a team, and when I see somebody else that's on my team doing something, I know they're progressing our team goals, and that feels really good to see somebody. Yesterday I was fishing, trying to catch some legendary fish, and I was fishing at a fishing hole where I saw other people on my team fishing, and that felt very good because we were working towards a common goal. Final Fantasy does not foster a lot of that. It's something that New World seems to be doing more and more of, and Final Fantasy seems to be doing less and less of. The downside of that is that in Final Fantasy XIV, right now, player subscriptions are up, the game's doing great, the fiscal reports look awesome, but if it ever wasn't, Final Fantasy XIV would never really have to die. As long as they keep the servers online, it would maintain itself as a valid playable experience. New World, on the other hand, has these massive surges of players, and they spin up all these new servers to help minimize queues, and people hop in, and when those people lose interest, they now have to go through server merges. Because while you have allowed player interaction to be meaningful, you have by its very nature made the most perfect, the most optimal, the preferred method of play is where player interaction is happening. Playing on a server where nobody else is helping progressing cities, where nobody else is doing quests, where nobody else is ever out in the world with you, is not how New World thrives. So when a server has a single-digit number of players online at a given time in Final Fantasy XIV, I'm not sure you'd notice outside of capital cities. If you were out in Thavnir just doing your dailies, it would make no difference to you if there were 100 people in that zone or you were alone in that zone. It would be a very similar experience and you would achieve your goals regardless. It would affect the same number of people regardless. But when you talk about New World, that same exact scenario, single-digit people on a server is wildly problematic. And so now you have to deal with server merges. You have to find a way. There is a minimum viable number of active players that are on at any given time and are on in any given month, week, or year that are mandatory for the server's natural systems to feel good. Because player interaction is a big part. It is not entirely player interaction. The fact that you are still doing a lot of things that foster solo play and allow them to do things like print gold, which I guess games think are as important now. But ultimately, player interaction is a big thing. But I don't think that is economic driven. I don't think a game has to have a good or bad economy in the ability to trade items, the ability to buy and sell things for a currency. You could have a barter system like Diablo 2 did. You could have a market board system like EVE Online functions from. I don't think anything that is traditionally considered economic is affected by that. I think player interaction is wildly separate, and a game can have or not have that, and it can have an economy or not have an economy. Sim Zoo or whatever allows you to, whatever zoo tycoon it is, you can sell animals to other players, but you play your zoo on your own. That's a player economy with very little player interaction. So they can be totally independent systems. Now, an MMO thrives when its systems interact with each other, so I think it's very good that he's pointing out that New World doesn't just have an economic system and a player interaction system. They funnel into each other, but they are different portions. They are different pillars of the same structure that is New World.
To gather and collect everything that's required for potions and food for the team. Usually there is somebody or multiple people on the team that are responsible for that and tend to be pretty hardcore about that. So I struggle to see the difference.
Yeah, it would make sense a WoW person wouldn't understand.
So the economy in New World is different because there are countless duping exploits that destroy the economy. Like, I'm not trying to just sit here and dunk on New World. Like, I'm genuinely, I'm trying to watch.
Yeah, and okay, so we've had duping and exploits. Like, there's been exploits and issues in all the games, and the thing that I look for is it addressed and is it constant? Thankfully, I think New World's done a really good job. I think Final Fantasy is still the best at it because they put out these reports on, on the Lodestone like every month about like the RMT and stuff like that they have. Because like if you guys saw my player-driven economy video, note that I was like, a player-driven economy requires more from the devs than just a player economy. Because while you have RMT and bots and all these things in all these games, like a RMT bot exploit has a bigger impact on a player-driven economy because the player-driven economy has a bigger impact overall.
Just with an open mind and hear what he's getting from the game that Final Fantasy IV doesn't have, that FF14 doesn't have. And New World, the economy blows up every 4 months because another game-breaking bug is found and exploited.
No, none of that's true.
Multiple updates caused item duplication in New World and destroyed the economy.
Those things have been fixed in New World. I talked about that when I reacted to her post. But saying that the economy blows up every 4 months or 8 months would be a weird criticism for Final Fantasy fans to leverage at New World, because Final Fantasy, by its very nature, the economy blows up every 4 to 8 months. It's on a timer. Every time there's a patch, there is a massive surge in economic use. The market board is something very different on a patch release. We get a minor patch release every 2 months, and we get a major patch release every 4 months. So it's major, half, major, half, major, half. And those major patch notes, like, those cause massive economic things. It is funneled into a handful of item IDs, but the amount of guild changing hands on patch day or patch week is absurd. So for a game that really doesn't foster long-term sustainable economic things and lets the vast majority of item IDs mean less after we get out of the expansion for which they were introduced, Final Fantasy does have a lot of economic relevance on patch day. It does. It absolutely does. That's the time to point to. When you talk to crafters and gatherers making money, point at patch day. Like that's your moment in the sun, right? That's your Black Friday. That's what you want to point at. But like when you look at an individual, you say, okay, I'm going to pull 1,000 random item IDs from across, you know, the whole game, and I'm going to look at a chart of what they were worth and how often people were buying and selling and trading them. First of all, you would have to remove everything that's market prohibited, which is a lot of things. But in addition to that, you would say, okay, what does it do? How often does it sell? And what happens to the price of that item? And with a few exception categories, things like mounts, minions, orchestrant scrolls, things like that, most items in the game trade hands substantially less often and at a substantially lower price after that expansion is price relative. And so if something was worth 1,000 gil in ARR and it's worth 10,000 gil now, but 1,000 gil from 1,000 gil worth of activities would now earn you 10,000 gil, then it's exactly the same. So when you account for inflation, which MMOs have a lot of, typically Final Fantasy XIV items decline. And I get Materia thrown at me as an example a lot. People go, well, Materia is always relevant. Just the current tier and the odd numbered from the last tier. The even numbered from the last tier and everything below the previous odd don't really have substantial value compared to when they were the peak Materia. And even then, Materia is most valuable when a new crafted set drops. I buy Materia regularly below vendor price the rest of the time, and then it spikes.
Multiple times.
Thanks for the shout out to Moogle Go Around. Appreciate that.
Okay. So. Okay.
It ends up giving value to. One last thought about the player driven economy, which is really great. All the new on the horizon MMOs are all touting that they're going to have a player driven economy. New World does, Ashes, Pantheon, Blue Protocol. I don't know about the ones that are right around the corner, like with Throne of Liberty. That's going to be interesting to see. But I hope that people start to recognize just how good it is. Yeah, and we're still live. Welcome in, everybody. We're reacting and fishing at the same time. So it's not.
You said from
But his argument about what is good about a player-driven economy is heavily focused on the fact that low-level players and players along the path and players doing any activity generate something that is valuable. And that is very easy for a new game to do. Show me a game that's 10 years old that does that. That's just all new games because they're in the current stuff. But when we move into an expansion, what happens? Very few games can keep things relevant beyond the current expansion. So you're naming upcoming games, you're naming young games as examples of where this is being done well. But I would argue that there is a very real chance that that's just young versus old. That's not actually a change in MMOs. It might be, and hindsight will tell us that, but there is also a very real chance that the moment New World moves into its next thing, and we move to jackalopes that drop heavy meat instead of light meat, that light meat is now just worthless. And so, like, giving credit to something that New World's doing better than current MMOs, I think is amazing. The fact that it could be so young and do things really well is amazing. But you do want to also keep in mind, is that a particular compliment that's coming from something that's easy to do? Right now, new players and veteran players play together a lot. That's because a veteran player's character can at most be 1 year old.
What do you read? The economy breaking bugs are still in the game since launch. So this is a point that he's making that I feel like I fundamentally do not understand.
Yeah, and she's being fed by fake news right now.
How does FF14 not have the player-driven economy that he's seeking, setting aside botters and RMT that's probably going to be present in any game? Tax had also mentioned something that he mentioned earlier. There are no fears with 1.0. They thought it was going to be amazing like FF11 without looking into the game industry at all or playing other games. Fear only kicked in once they realized the game was not coming together and were not given more time to fix it. Yeah, it does
don't know
seem
what she's
like
talking
that
about.
They weren't worried about much whenever they made it. Maybe they should have been worried about it a bit more when they were looking at the game they're about to put onto the market. FF14 literally has that. Crafters and gatherers are important when a raid tier drops. Yeah, that's what I...
That is like, oh my gosh, they do not know what a player-driven economy is. And there's, unless you experience, like, it's got to be something that they need to experience, because crafters and gatherers are important when a raid tier drops is not a player-driven economy. It's a moment, that's the thing. I'm like, why craft and gather? I don't get it. You're going to make a little extra gil because there is an economy. I just couldn't understand it. Spongy says, what's interesting here is that they're focusing on things that don't really matter.
I think the idea that Gil doesn't matter in 14 is something Brian and I agree on. That's not like just a bad thing. Like it's bad and good. And so like everything has pros and cons. And that's part of it. If Gil matters, then people with the most Gil matter more. Final Fantasy does not want that inequality. So when you call for more economic change in Final Fantasy, it would fundamentally change. Right now, as much as there are players that think they're better than other players, they're not. Nothing in Final Fantasy XIV sets one player above another player. Everybody can achieve everything at every time. And that is something very intentional in its design. And Yoshi P gets really hurt when a particular group of players get excluded for what class they play, things like that. So, like, if you start to make wealth matter, the downside of that is that you make wealth matter. The upside is that you make wealth matter. Like, it is its own inherent pro and con. If you make gold matter, if New World truly becomes a game once it is 2, 4, 5, 10 years old, where gold matters, and gold becomes the be-all, end-all, then if I go into New World and become better at making gold, then I am better than Brian. Period. End of story. Full stop. In EVE Online, the faction that has unlimited resources can... I have friends that played for Goonswarm. I played on Goonswarm. They literally went onto other markets and bought all of certain components, bought up things, and then went in and killed people's ships, and they had trouble replacing them. You can literally abuse other players. Has nothing to do with consent, has nothing to do with what the devs do, because economy matters. And so if we have more wealth, we can dictate the other player experience. That's not all good. It was real fun for us. It was real fun for us to screw with other people. To go into their local stations and mess with them. That's not all good. Player-driven economies, you need to be very, very careful how far you let that go. It's the reason that market prohibited, that soul-bound items exist, is that there needs to be times that things cannot be traded. Not everything can be traded. Brian wants everything to be tradable. The best cosmetics in the game, tradable. The highest item level gear, tradable. There is a reason that these games gate things, and even the upcoming MMOs, I assume, will have a handful of things that are gated. That varies by games, how much is gated. In Final Fantasy XIV, basically all dungeon loot is gated. In World of Warcraft, a huge chunk of dungeon loot is not gated. Raid loot is heavily, but not exclusively gated in World of Warcraft. In Final Fantasy XIV, it's not. So, like, arguing what percentage of things should be tradable is an interesting idea. What percentage do you want it to be? Does it matter what it comes from? Does it matter how hard it is to get? What it's used for? Is cosmetics should always be tradable, but power should not? That we could debate till we're blue in the face. But a lot of what he's asking for, if New World builds a system to thrive on having more economy, and he prefers it that way, that's great. And if Final Fantasy decides to stay away from that, that's great too. It is not something that makes one game better than the other. It is just something that helps make one game different from one another.
The economy in games always finds a way to balance itself out. As long as, especially in a game that has endless resources, I can fish for eternity and there's no negative impact to the game, you have to have there some level of regulation and management from the developers so that, like, botting and these kind of systems don't come into play. I've seen people try to argue that, like, oh, I'm botting, I'm keeping prices low. It's like, no, when prices rise, that incentivizes more people if they want to take that opportunity and go do those things, or they've got those materials, they can have that ebb and flow. But bots arbitrarily keep prices low, which reduce player interest and take content away from a player. And so you have to have that extra level of regulation, because there is no real scarcity in an online MMO. But yeah, it's very clear Zepla does not understand what a player-driven economy is. It's also very clear that her chat is feeding her fake news.
There is scarcity in an MMO. If it's a true player-driven economy, there's absolute scarcity, because everything becomes a factor of time. If every single resource in a game came from time, there is a finite amount of time that players will spend on any one activity. There is an inherent limit. If, however, something becomes very easy to acquire en masse, World of Warcraft makes its gold wildly available. For very little time per player, they introduce large amounts of gold into the economy, and so gold becomes something that's wildly inflationary. Sometimes that's a particular item. I think materia in Final Fantasy XIV is something that's very inflationary. There's a lot more materia being introduced into the system on a typical day out of 365 days in a year than is being consumed. And so typically prices do nothing except fall on materia the majority of days out of a year. Now, when new content drops that calls for materia and the consumption rate spikes, that causes that item to just literally go from what is for some reason below vendor price to being thousands of times vendor price. It spikes all at once, but typically it is on an ever downward trend. But scarcity in an MMO does exist. There is this idea that it doesn't because it's infinite, but it's not infinite as long as it's being done by players. As long as players are given. So an example where scarcity does not exist is vendor items. Things that I can go to a vendor and I can right-click buy it, and I can do that forever. If I have an unlimited amount of gold, I can buy it forever. There is no scarcity in that. Vendor prices become not only a floor, but also a ceiling. The price will never go lower than them, unless players can also acquire that and are willing to sell it lower. And a price will never go higher than them unless players are too lazy to go to that vendor. That item becomes fixed at that. There is no scarcity. It is not tied to supply demand. It is now a static price, not a dynamic price. And so there's this idea in economics, since words matter, where you talk about elastic and inelastic demand. And that is where, like, for example, medicine is inelastic. If you need medicine to survive, the price going up won't make you buy it. Pop-Tarts are elastic demand. If Pop-Tarts suddenly spiraled to $30 a box, you would simply stop buying them. And so it is something that is tied to it. And that rubber band can get taut or can be loose, but it is ultimately going to move left or right based on the price. So as we start to use all these words, they matter. And I do think there's a fundamental difference in New World versus Final Fantasy, but some of the things he's arguing for aren't based on economics. They're based on design philosophies that New World has as well. Some of the things he's talking about are things these games have in common.
And there's nothing we can do about that. We're just going to have to keep going because, gamers, right?
Doesn't that happen in every game? Yeah, like, I think almost everybody has had this experience where you look on the market board, something's really expensive. So you have to ask yourself, do I want to go gather this or not? Do I want to spend the time to go gather that, or do I want to buy it right now because I'm lazy? Or in Final Fantasy XIV, you actually have more options because you can go to any server and buy on their market board, which is going to have different prices than your main server's market board. In fact, you can go to a different data center now and check the other data center servers' market boards and try to find a better price that way from other players if you really cannot be arsed to gather it yourself.
The multiple servers is a poor argument. It's a poor argument. That's just arbitrage at best. That's not increased economic use. Arbitrage exists as a convenience. It's not actually the middleman, whether it's you or it's somebody else, is only making money because of something about the system that's flawed. If all things were available to all people in all ways at all times, they wouldn't exist. Arbitrators, like people who buy something here low and then sell somewhere else high simply for the act of moving things, unless there is an actual logistical cost, like they're putting it on a boat in a shipping container and shipping it. Things like cryptocurrencies or stuff in video games. That's not good economic use. That don't get me wrong. I have absolutely profited from those systems. Buying vendor items and selling them high, that should never happen. And yet I've done it. You guys have watched me buy Orchestran scrolls for 5,000 and sell them for 200,000 in under 30 minutes. It should not happen, but it does happen. But that's not the sign of a good economy.
So again, like,
without any real value for Gil and progression, then it doesn't really matter. You have the ability to do a player economy. We're talking about two distinct ideas. It's unfortunate that Zepla does not know the difference in that regards. I think it would be a much more interesting back and forth right here to kind of get that perspective from her in the long run. Maybe we'll get her on the podcast and kind of talk it out, because Chris also comes from WoW. Like, when it comes down to it, everybody that I've been hearing feedback in it, it's just maybe not their kind of either the tea if they've experienced it, or and she has. I think she's played Guild Wars 2. So Guild Wars 2 probably most likely is the closest thing, if not an actual player-driven economy. I'm not going to speak to something I don't have immense knowledge.
Sometimes WoW, from a person who doesn't like WoW and has been in the MMORPG space in a long time, sometimes WoW becomes this disease that I've been tainted with, and it's now chronic, and I can't beat it, and it's non-curable. And so everything that comes out of my mouth can be dismissed because I played WoW. When we're talking about player interaction, we're talking about economies in New World versus Final Fantasy XIV. WoW doesn't matter. WoW doesn't matter. Nothing I'm talking about today does WoW matter. We can use it as a data point. We could not use it as a data point. WoW is not the driving force. I have played Final Fantasy XIV since A Realm Reborn. I played New World on launch, and I've been playing it off and on since. World of Warcraft has no direct bearing on what we're talking about here. When you're talking about player interactions, when you're talking about economy, I could leave WoW out as an example from the rest of this video, and it doesn't become what's shaping my mind. That's not the driving force, but there is this idea of like when he says unfortunate, that's a little bit dismissive. Like, oh, it's unfortunate that you're just too tainted by your past. Like, it's unfortunate. Like, it's something my friends and I would joke about with what college we went to, because we went to rival colleges. So it'd be like, oh, well, it's unfortunate that since you're an Aggie, you're just too stupid to know better. Like, that's a funny thing to say to a friend. It's incredibly dismissive to say in this context. It has no bearing here. And to say that some game he didn't like somehow makes his opinion more valid, I find really dismissive. I don't think he meant it that way. Brian's a lot warmer and more empathetic of a person than I am. He's a lot kinder than I am. So I don't think he meant it that way, but it comes across as really smug and dismissive. Especially because, like, I don't think of Zepla as a WoW player anymore. Right? This isn't somebody who just came over. She is a Final Fantasy creator. She is aware of WoW, but she is a Final Fantasy creator. Just like Brian's not a Final Fantasy XI player. I don't care if he has a current sub or not. Like, that's not the majority of what people know him for.
John, though, is yours. And that ties into number 2, player choice, player builds, being able to really define your character. This is one of the things that is obviously missing from Final Fantasy XIV 1.0, and we've seen it become more curated. It's interesting that a lot of people...
That's valid.
I understand why.
Yeah, I mean, that is valid. But in New World, can you play, like, every class on one character? Because the thing with FF14, no, you don't have builds. No, you don't have talent trees. But your job will work right out the box. And if you don't like it, you can just play completely different job with a different weapon.
And that's why also the raid culture, like, I get it. I would rather them just silo the raids so that you could have player choice in Final Fantasy XIV, but then you could protect the raids, as opposed to having the raids dictate all the balance and player choice in the entire game. The entire game. Blue Mage is locked away from content because it's the only thing that actually has real choice and flexibility in its job design, right? And what the people, I've seen people counter on the 14, they're like, oh, you can play the multiple jobs. That's not build out variety. Your warrior's your warrior. And it's the difference is so, like, because they're striving for that balance, and they should have just siloed the raids and say, listen, raids are a part of a curated experience. We see Destiny actually do this. They say, as a part of the world first race, we're going to silo the raids and we're going to turn things off, and you can't do certain things because we've discovered that those will literally just break the raid and the mechanics we have in it. But 14 takes that and just applies it across the board. And the strength is that it makes it easier for them to balance things. It does. And it means that they can release content at a faster pace than anybody has over the last 10 years, at least, in terms of their content. You know, every 3-ish months now, every 4-ish months. I didn't mean to pull the trigger on that one. So,
okay,
you can step in, you can pick whatever weapons suit you, you can have your own crazy build, you can pick your stats, you can focus on your perks. You, in a way, can define what is best in slot for you and best.
So, in Elder Scrolls Online, I could make my own build, but it ended up being really scuffed at endgame because I created my own build just from whatever I wanted, and I liked it and it was working for me while I was leveling. But when I got to endgame, people wanted a cookie cutter build. Is it similar situation in New World where people are at the end of the day going to start expecting a certain type of build from you?
Yes. Yes.
New World there will always be meta builds.
Yes.
Because people were like, oh.
People will bow down and worship the meta more than anything else in a matchmaking base game. In a matchmaking base game, the meta ends up becoming even more powerful. But here's the thing. If we got in a group of 4 people and you were rocking whatever, it doesn't matter because we're not getting matchmade. We're all kind of deciding beforehand. Will there be toxic jerks? Yes, they're in both. They're in every game. You're like, anybody who says that X community is not toxic has either lied to themselves or they're the toxic ones and they're going about and they're just crushing that for sure. But it's, yeah, back into the raid mindset. Like the fact that the raid, like they make this pinnacle thing and then it completely changes the culture around the game itself, right? If you want to raid, great. Here's the thing though, this ties right back into the player driven economy. You go raid, you get your loot, and then you go take a break or whatever, right? Like it's this event, right? And that's fine. You can have the world first race, but like what they should add to the raids in 14 would be materials that the crafting system could take, and then they could craft or enhance the weapons that they've already been making. Then all of a sudden you start to see the remnants of a player driven economy where you can have Gil actually get you to the power requirements. But Brian, if you don't want to do the raid, you don't need the power anyway. Like that completely is like, I don't understand that argument. Why? Like what if I want the power? Because the power makes me faster when farming in the open world or whatever. Like stop limiting and stop saying and trying to enforce your view on me. I'm not trying to force my view on you. I'm just literally going to go play the game that literally is doing the thing that I want. I don't get it. Like I'm not, and the thing is like, you'll hear me and you've heard me in this video already in this reaction. Like I'm not sitting here saying and like that they need to adhere to Brian, because I know there would be frustration within the community in 14 because they've trained up the community. I am curious to see if Yoshi P does make a new MMO. Does he have that? And there is a time gating behind it. So it's like within the raid, like it's all time gated, and then it gets completely trashed for newer gear. That's all like just a number. And it boggles my mind. It really does not compute. And I think essentially what happens is you get more and more people into that mindset. It's just like, why would you spend that time beating your head against the wall when in 8 weeks it's just going to get replaced? Now here, like 8 months, it's just going to get replaced. So why not give multiple pathways? Like it's all like catching hopefully a theme of player choice, right? Economics balance the scales, but players get to decide what they want to do.
Rockin' chair.
And Chaotic Mess, thank you so much for the tips.
Boy, howdy. Back in my day, I
Storm's
remember
coming.
Okay, so there was a lot to unpack there. So we need to back up to the beginning because he jumped points really, really rapidly. And so the benefit of a reaction is that you get to go back in time and address this one thing at a time. So let's talk through the beginning of it.
In a matchmaking-based game, the meta ends up becoming even more powerful. But here's the thing. If we got in a group of 4 people...
Okay, in a matchmaking, the meta becomes driving. Only to the degree that the devs say it should. So in a matchmaking system, when we were talking about Duty Finder versus if we get in a group of 4, which is a manual partying system, which is Party Finder. It's just a board. You can choose who to play with. Maybe you do it off your friends list. Maybe you do it off a public posting. But ultimately, everybody in that party chose to be there, and everybody in that party chose to accept going in with that group of people. They even put filters on there as far as what you're looking for, item level, things like that, to help you align with somebody so that you're not having to ask them a bunch of interview questions. You can just say, here's what we're looking for. So you've got the Party Finder system, the looking for group system, where we are manually choosing who's in our party. Every MMORPG of today has this system that has instanced dungeon style content. There's also the match-made system, which has become incredibly prevalent in games. And this is where I say, put me in with anybody. I'll let the game decide what is important. So the Duty Finder system, the one that opts us in, does not dictate the meta. It does not dictate the meta, because all it does is it says this content is clearable by, for example, in Final Fantasy XIV, 1 tank, 1 healer, 2 DPS, period. It doesn't matter what DPS they are. It could be 2 melees, it could be 2 ranged, it could be the 2 lowest DPS classes in the game, and they only have to be over the minimum item level, which means they don't have to be geared particularly well. Minimum item level is lower than the average gear score of an active player when the content drops. Minimum item level is incredibly low in Final Fantasy XIV, compared to what the typical person will be in as. And since we spend a lot of time in Duty Finder running old content or content as it ages, a lot of times we're in gear scores well above what even the average was, to the point where it has to sink us down to an artificial gear cap. So gear score is not a factor, class is not a factor. In the matchmaking system, the word he uses, he is the one that said word choice matters. In the matchmaking system, there is no distinguishable, meaningful meta. The devs have put the bare minimum requirements, And some of those requirements really aren't that restrictive at all. They don't require player skill. They don't require that you have your abilities unlocked. They don't require that you have what an average player would actually prefer you have as far as gear score. They don't prefer you to be on the classes that players would prefer to see. They don't align you with anything that is that traditional definition of player-dictated meta. It just doesn't. There is no meta in the matchmaking system. The matchmaking system is not what dictates meta. So I fundamentally disagree with his opening point of this section, because that's not where meta comes from. Where meta comes from is that players have a limited amount of time and energy to put into a video game, and very few players enjoy failing. There are games out there for people that do. The Souls franchise is built around that. Dwarf Fortress is built around that. But a lot of people play video games and want to have some success. They want to have success. And so they dictate what the methods are that have been successful in the past. So they build the mountain and they say, here is the most successful thing, here are some less successful things, here are some less successful things, and here is the garbage. And you get to decide how high up that you want to climb. And so in a manual matchmaking system, the player base as a whole gets to decide how high up the mountain you need to be to find a group. And they get to decide if something is possible. The player-driven meta is what causes players to be excluded from things based on playing in a particular mindset. Versus playing with a particular build, playing with too low of a gear score, playing without having watched guides, playing without all their abilities on the bar. Whatever they do, the players are the ones that decide the minimum efficiency to be allowed in a group.
And you were rocking whatever, it doesn't matter because we're not getting match made. We're all kind of deciding beforehand. Will there be toxic jerks? Yes, they're in both. They're in every game. You're like, anybody who says that X community is not toxic has either lied to themselves or they're the toxic ones and they're going about and they're just crushing that for sure. But it's, yeah, back into the raid mindset. Like the fact that the raid, like they make this pinnacle thing and then it completely changes the culture around the game itself, right? If you want to raid, great. Here's the thing though, this ties right back into the player-driven economy. You go raid, you get your loot, and then you go take a break or whatever, right? Like it's this.
No. You did not acquire the best in slot gear in a player-driven economy to then log out. If he wants to talk about a raid mindset, you acquired the best in slot gear to be able to do the best in slot stuff. So he talks about, if I had the best in slot gear, I'd be able to better open world farm. So you want to keep going. There is also an idea that typically raiders do not just raid because of the gear. Typically, people will not struggle through something for the gear. Ultimate is a great example of this. There are a lot of people that clear Ultimates, do not equip that title, do not care for that glamour. They clear it to clear it. It is an intrinsic fun for them. Intrinsic, internal, as opposed to an extrinsic, external fun. I am not doing it for the loot. I do want the loot. I don't want to not do it. But I am doing it because I like it. And so they're going to go back and they're going to clear that content again. So he has this idea of, I don't know why I'd work so hard to clear it and then just take a break. The people who are working so hard to clear it oftentimes don't just take a break. There are some that do. I'm one that just clears it once and that's good for me. I just wanted to taste it. Thank you very much. But when he talks about a raid set mentality, a raid set community, I would not consider myself part of that, because to be part of a community, you need to stick around for a while. People need to know your name. You need to say hello. You need to be a regular. You need to come in and help the people who are behind you and work hard to help not make it so hard on the people ahead of you. When people get partied with you, you're doing your best. And when people get partied, when you're helping them, hopefully they're doing their best and you're going to kind of carry each other through it. It's a community. It's a communal effort to upward trend. We're trying to get total increased raid clears. We're all having fun here. So the people who just come in, get what they want and leave, I would not consider those a raid mindset community members. Those are people that are coming in to extract their resource and leave. There are people that do that. They come in, they get their bits, they're done. but I don't consider those the core raiding community that dictate the raiding mindset he's defining. I think that is defined more by people like Rin Karagani, Lama Todd, their community, which there are plenty of non-content creators are. When you talk about, you know, all of the different people that have been in my various kind of Savage clears and stuff, a lot of those people who are people who have cleared the raids, there are people in our community that come in and help me through Savage, and they're not going to get loot. If we get a clear tonight, they will not receive loot, or they don't want to receive loot. They're just here because it's fun.
Event, right? And that's fine. You can have the world first race, but like, it doesn't matter because we're not getting match made. We're all kind of deciding beforehand. Will there be toxic jerks? Yes, they're in both. They're in every game. You're like, anybody who says that X community is not toxic has either lied to themselves or they're the toxic ones, and they're going about and they're just crushing that for sure. But it's, yeah, back into the raid mindset. Like the fact that the raid, like they make this pinnacle thing and then it completely changes the culture around the game itself, right? If you want to raid, great. Here's the thing, though. This ties right back into the player-driven economy. You go raid, you get your loot, and then you go take a break or whatever, right? Like it's this event, right? And that's fine. You can have the world first race, but like what they should add to the raids in 14 would be materials that the crafting system could take, and then they could craft or enhance the weapons that they've already been making. Then all of a sudden you start to see the remnants of a player-driven economy where you can have Gil actually get you to the power requirements. But Brian, if you don't want to do the raid, you don't need the power anyway. Like that completely is like, I don't understand that argument. Why? Like, what if I want the power because the power makes me faster when farming in the open world or whatever? Like, stop limiting and stop saying and trying to enforce your view on me. I'm not trying to force my view on you. I'm just literally going to go play the game that literally is doing the thing that I want. I don't get it. Like, I'm not, and the thing is, like, you'll hear me, and you've heard me in this video already, in this reaction, like, I'm not sitting here saying, and like, that they need to adhere to Brian, because I know there would be frustration with it.
Okay, so on New World, one of the things I don't know is, did Brimstone Sands add new loot? I just literally don't know the answer to this. So did Brimstone Sands add loot that was of a item level that was higher than what was originally obtainable? If we back ourselves up before Brimstone Sands dropped as a patch, does it increase? Legendary drops from Brimstone Sands dungeons. Okay. Does it have a item level associated with it? Well, 64. Okay. So there we go. Okay, so we've got some stuff here. We've got some crafting stuff. We've got some tier 5. Okay, so in New World, when you get stuff, tier determines like how good of a crafting material it is. Tier 5, was tier 5 wildly available in game before that? So this looks like it was available down at level 55. So is there a way to get this before? New World database, recipe trackers. I just literally don't know this. So we've got weaponsmithing, for example. And I want to make this. Right? So I want to make this weapon. It's got 500 base damage. Does anybody know if Brimstone Sands now generates the best gear? There's a gear score. So that's your gear score. Okay. So Brimstone Sands gear score is the term we're using. Item level is called gear score, and that's fine. Minimum item level for gear score. No gear score increase. So was there no gear score increase? New Brimstone scans will be 600. Well, which is it? Here we go. Got it. Okay, so now we're here. New World 1.7 Brimstone Sands. This is their newest patch. Updates a lot of in-game additions as well as some balance. Brimstone Sands will take us into our new area. The Great Sword got added as a weapon type. That's like adding a new class, kind of. We added like some new abilities for everybody. There's new crafting. There's a new event. They revamped the starting experience. Patch notes. Can I click this? Below, you can read it. No, I don't want to... Can I... I don't want to spotlight, do I? I just want to read the whole thing. Revamp player experience. Great sword weapon. Heart gem abilities. General. Did they increase the gear score? Because some of what he's frustrated at is that the gear expires. And I'm wondering, is New World going to set the trend of gear expiring? The reason gear expires has nothing to do with player economy. It has to do with the fact that the next patch drops better gear. So, will patches to New World drop better gear? That's the question. It has nothing to do with player-driven economy. It has nothing to do with the gear sourcing. He can be frustrated with the gear sourcing. It has everything to do with the fact that better gear is right around the corner. So I'm wondering if in New World, better gear is right around the corner. Okay, Kara's here. New Brimstone Sands did not increase item level. Okay, thank you.
In the community in 14, because they've trained up the community. I am curious to see if Yoshi P does make a new MMO. Does he have that? And there is a time gating behind it, so it's like within the raid, like it's all time gated, and then it gets completely trashed for newer gear. That's all like just a number, and it boggles my mind. It really does not compute, and I think
that's not player-driven economy. That's not whether or not the gear is gated from him because he can't buy it with Gil. That's entirely does a patch in the future drop better gear than now? And if the answer is yes, then players are going to stop caring about your current stuff as soon as there's enough new stuff to replace it, which in Final Fantasy XIV is every 8 months. Every 8 months, we release gear that is so much better that the previous stuff doesn't matter. So if New World goes down that road, which it is in its second year, it's a little early to say it will, it's a little early to say it won't. Will better gear score drop?
I think essentially what happens is you get more and more people into that mindset. It's just like, why? Why would you spend that time beating your head against the wall when in 8 weeks it's just going to get replaced?
Because it's fun. Because it's fun. The same reason you would grind up gold in a game. Like, we play games for fun. That's why. That's the reason.
When, now here, like 8 months, it's just going to get replaced.
Yep.
So why not give multiple pathways? Like, it's all like catching hopefully a theme of player choice.
There is multiple pathways. This has been one of the frustrations with Brian, and I tried to sum it up in a video, and like, as somebody who doesn't chase perfect bis, I don't always get it exactly right, because it's not something I directly interact with, but I am aware of it, right? It's just beyond me. So for example, what am I in right now? Am I on my main? No, I'm not. Let's switch to my main. So, stand by. If there is gear score in a game, odds are it will go up over time. Because people will want something more powerful to chase. Because what will happen is they'll realize, why do I keep playing this game if I have the best it's ever going to be? It's something that Guild Wars really struggles to retain players long term because of that. There are players that find a lot of joy in Guild Wars and stick around, but when you ask why the game's not as big as World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy, it's because the number of people that did play Guild Wars, liked it, and don't play is very, very large. Okay, while that logs in, let's continue.
Right? Economics balance the scales, but players get to decide what they want to do.
Rockin' chair.
And Chaotic Mess, thank you so much for the
Yeah,
toys.
boy, howdy. Back in my day, I
Storm's
remember
coming.
oh yeah, it's gonna be a big one. I can feel it in my bones.
Atronach, that's my aesthetic. They're like, what the fuck is that? Like, have these expectations so that we don't have to sit around vetting your weird build to see if it's going to be good enough or not. Like, no one has time to do all that.
There's this idea right here. T-Shell might be here today. There is this idea that gets thrown out a lot. It's fairly common. Raiders are afraid that they won't exclusively have the best gear. It's not a fear. Fear kind of implies that they're insecure or cowardly or something like that. If somebody is chasing the best in slot gear, they will do whatever the game says is the method to get there. So if raiders can get gear from crafters, then they will get the gear from crafters. And so sometimes you like that something is asked of you and there's no way around it. Sometimes that's fun, right? Like I went and ran my first triathlon recently, and one of my friends goes, "But why? You could have just stayed home. Like, why go do that?" Because I wanted to. So like, and there was no way to have completed it besides completing it. And so if you can get to the same reward, the same end game by not doing it, it's one of the trophies. So if you can just go get the trophy without participating, then it kind of diminishes its meaning. And it's not about, they're placing a lot of value on themselves in this situation. They're saying the raider is afraid that I'll have the gear. I'll be really honest, a lot of the raiders don't care about you. It's much more base level than that. It's much more selfish. A lot of the people I've talked to, they're worried that now in them, in their immediate static, that it's going to become reliant of them. It's now going to be an expectation. Now, if there's somebody who Party Finder raids, they're going to be expected to have all that new crafted gear. Because the minimum item level in Party Finder is going to go up, because now that gear is obtainable. So the time gating allows for that. You can actually bypass this with things like Tank Cobb and stuff, where you start to totally detach from everybody else. But it's not a fear of, well, I have to have something you don't have. Like, I do think that's part of it for some people, but I think that to sum it up as that is actually a little bit simple. It's just nice to have something that can only be earned the one way. It's just nice.
Your stats point which buff.
And here's the thing. T-Shaw says, Raiders are afraid that they won't exclusively have the best gear. You can still, in these systems I'm talking about, put the best gear behind the raid. You're like, well, right, well,
No,
Brian, you're contradicting
you
yourself.
can't.
No. Now you bring in perks, right? Like, outside of gear. Like, the fact you can't not do that in 14. That just wouldn't work. But if you had perks and various different build options, here's the real kicker. You might have a different BIS than the raider. Easy. Problem solved. But that raider might prefer that BIS for whatever they're doing. Raiding, right?
So he just wants the item level to read the same? That's what he wants? He just wants this number over here to read the same? I'm at 618. Current BIS is 630. So he just wants the number to be the same? He doesn't actually care. He doesn't care that he can't get their gear. He just cares that the number is the same?
You can have a perk that makes that abyss in the raid. Cool. But I can go engage in the economy. I can still get on the same power scale, and I can have completely different perks that, guess what? Appeal to me and perhaps enhance my group's experience. We have our own meta. We have our own BIS. We have our own.
That's not how BIS is calculated. He's talking about BIS like it's an opinion. And I do think that, like, if BIS is a mountain that you climb, and the closer to it there is one peak. And if you say, well, I'm not willing to do what it takes to get to the peak, I'm going to go to here, and that's where I'm going to stop, right? I'm going to get to this base camp here, and I'm going to stop. That's fine, but it's not BIS. So BIS actually is determined by math, and it is literally the best theoretical, most optimal amount of damage that can come out of your class. And so in a Final Fantasy system where you don't have things like perks, as he's describing them, there's not even build variety. There's a BIS. So if you're detaching BIS to where now it's what's BIS for your group, if you're calling BIS like a self-determined opinion, then anything you want to do is BIS. Like, you just define your own BIS within what you can achieve and move on. The community-driven BIS is it's not something we vote on. It's not democratic. It's not like a big cult mindset. It's just math. It can be determined by a spreadsheet totally on your own in your basement. Like, it doesn't... BIS in an MMORPG is based on the most optimal outcome. It has nothing to do with my BIS versus your BIS. BIS is BIS. It's best in slot.
Choice. We are not dictated. If we want, Raider might prefer that BIS for whatever they're doing. Raiding, right? You can have a perk that makes that a BIS in the raid. Cool. But
so if we had perks in Final Fantasy XIV, his argument is that if there was a perk that made you do bonus damage against bosses, savage bosses specifically, that perk might only be available on gear that is market prohibited from the savage tier. And so he would not be able to get that as long as he could get all the perks for the content he's in. Is that what I'm understanding? So he's calling for perks, not everything to not be market prohibited.
I can go engage in the economy. I can still get on the same power scale, and I can have completely different perks that, guess what, appeal to me and perhaps enhance my group's experience. We have our own meta. We have our own BIS. We have our own choice. We are not dictated. If we want to get the gear behind the raid, I got no problem if they want to go clear it, but I would prefer that there was some kind of economics right behind it. The perk drops on the boss, right? Materials are then produced from the raid, put into the economy. Gear is made, maybe a replica. Maybe it doesn't have the perk. Maybe it has a different set of perk. Maybe that is actually a BIS for somebody else. That's what I feel like I get in New World. I get the choice. I can go farm all these different options.
I look forward to getting into a New World, man. I look forward to it. Because I think some of the things he's calling for, my assumption is that they exist in New World. And maybe that's just pessimism. Maybe it's just somebody that's played a lot of MMOs. But I assume that if you get to the absolute peak, tip-top portion of Brimstone, that there's a meta. That there's a meta. I assume there are weapon combos that people just ask why you're wearing that. I assume there is an optimal gear rating between light, medium, and heavy. I assume that in PvP, people want you playing a certain way. Certain weapons are considered trash. I just naturally assume there's a meta. And therefore, there's Abyss. There might be multiple things at that level that are lateral, but there is a best. And anything that is not in that category is inherently worse. These 5 items are Abyss. Everything else is worse to varying degrees. I cannot imagine a game where there are multiple ways to play, and those play all dictate different amounts of outgoing damage where something is not seen as best.
I can go engage with the economy. Me fishing, making money feeds everybody. There's this asynchronous sense that we're kind of all in this together. And this is what somebody said in one of the videos. I really liked it. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And I think what we've seen with the modern MMO, it's got to go fast, dopamine, got to go fast. Oh, we burn them out, etc. All right, new round of advertising, bring in more players, and we'll get them on the drip. I don't have that experience in New World. New World feels like a game where if I want to go fast, I can go fast. And I did this summer. I pushed my expertise gear up. We got in the New World community. People trying to like gatekeep. They're like, this guy's not even in all 625s. Who gives a shit? Who?
Oh, so there is a meta. Okay, never mind. He answered it. You guys in chat have been saying it, but he answered it. He is being gatekeeped in... Is he talking Final Fantasy right now?
I don't. It doesn't affect what I'm doing. I can pull down 40 or 50 G's a week if I want to. I probably could do more if I even cared. But I'm having a good time. It's a relaxing experience.
Okay, so that's not a New World unique thing. So this is actually the way... So when I switched over from WoW to 14, I viewed it as an opportunity to like moving to a new town if you ever moved when you were young, going to a different school, your first day of high school. You got a fresh start. You got a new job. And you decided you're going to be somebody different. Maybe you got a different haircut. Maybe you're going to dress a little different. Maybe you're going to make a different focus in your life. A new chapter. You're going to be around all new people. They don't have any expectations of you. And so you're going to form new relationships around this new improved version of yourself. You're going to try tweaking something with the aim of improving yourself. We all improve across our lives, I hope. And so when I came over to Final Fantasy XIV, I aimed to play differently than all of the reasons I did not like about WoW. And what I found was that I really enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed Final Fantasy XIV. Now, as I have gone back and reinstalled World of Warcraft and I've installed Guild Wars, I've actually found that while there are fundamental differences between Final Fantasy and WoW, because I played Final Fantasy as a story skipper, a lot of those key differences, because I chose not to engage in Savage and get to know the differences in the combat at that level, a lot of the key differences between Final Fantasy and WoW weren't actually having that large of an impact on me. What was having the single biggest impact on me was that I was playing differently. It had nothing to do with that. I could have just transferred to a new server in WoW, been a new person around a new friend group playing differently, and had the same experience in a lot of ways. I could have just deleted my characters and started over and had the same thing. So what I'm hearing him argue is that this is a fresh start, because what he's saying is, I can choose my bis in New World. Because in Final Fantasy, when people have better gear than me and have cleared further content than me, I am told that I am not as good as them. But in New World, when I am told that people have better gear than me and are not as good as me, I can tell them to screw off. There is no fundamental difference. He's not truly getting bis from avoiding top-end content in New World. He's just allowing his definition of bis to be a larger portion of what he's dictating than in 14. In 14, he sees the item level, he knows it's worse, he admits it's worse, and it frustrates him. And in New World, he sees the gear score and says, gear score doesn't matter, therefore I'm bis, because bis is an opinion. This is not an opinion. So I think it's great that you're playing differently. I love Final Fantasy, and actually what I found is when I took a whole expansion off from World of Warcraft, that was a long enough gap, I skipped Warlords of Draenor, that when I went back into World of Warcraft after it ended up being about 3 years off, I actually went back to World of Warcraft and I changed my keybinds to my Final Fantasy XIV keybinds. I joined groups of players, I found new groups to run with, and I played World of Warcraft the way I play 14. I messed around with different gold making methods, I dabbled in some modes, I played casually, I ignored my item level, I didn't worry about clearing the latest raid. I really like World of Warcraft. I do. Because I play it casually, and it turns out I really like it casually, but I had gotten so attached to being in the top end of what I was capable of getting to that I didn't have the ability to step back and just be casual. So what changed was me. What changed was me. And so if you're going to be casual in Final Fantasy XIV, you're going to spend all your time in synced content. The only open world content that's going to give continual rewards long term are things like hunt trains, where your total DPS doesn't matter because it's launched in a big pool. And so if you have tank stance on and you do a single tomahawk, you've got max contribution. And so if you play Final Fantasy XIV casually, you can cap your tomes every week. You can clear all the normal raids. You can farm old extremes, get all the mounts. With the exception of Ultimate, you're not locked out of anything. So you can have the same experience he's describing as soon as you say, bis to me is whatever is the most fun for me, not what's mathematically best. Because it sounds like that's what he's saying about New World, which is not true. Like, New World has a bis and he does not have it. Final Fantasy has a bis and he does not have it. But in one of those, he's saying, the reason I don't have it is BS, and I'm frustrated at this game. And the other one, he's saying, the reason I don't have it is because I don't want it, and people who have it can screw off. I literally capped homes mid-stream yesterday. On Monday, I just toggled over the game, I did 3 hunt trains, I was capped for the day, and my gear score did not matter.
It's been a wonderful journey.
It'll work. I had to change materia on my tank for a dungeon because it kept dying. People always say crit is best, but in Pi, even better. What? What? That's what I'm saying. Build your own is more like fail your own. People try to force cookie cutter builds when cookie cutter builds aren't always necessary to clear the content.
You'd feel differently though, T-Shaw, if you did the mythic raids to supply the market for the money, and you made a bunch of money by doing that because there was demand, right? And then essentially you team up with the crafter or you work with the team and you get that. the thing is that it creates the opportunity for us to have an organic and maybe never even talk, but still have that aspect that we're all in on this together. And that is essentially coming from, I'm like, again, if that's the kind of game you like, that's an MMO light. That's MMORPG. Like and again, this is all my perspective. I don't like, who cares? Like who ultimately cares? It is in my mind, the metaverse in which that we're all experiencing. And it seems strange, like bind on pickup seems like this weird idea. I'm fine with bind on equip, but it doesn't offend me at all if somebody wants to go, because what's difficult content, right? You say difficult content's Mythic Plus, but why don't you go pick 10 trillion flowers or harvest 10 trillion logs? What's harder? The economy actually decides the difficulty scale. But again, I support bind on equip because you got to have something drawing things out of the economy.
Modern MMOs in which matchmaking really has a massive impact and a massive cost to the social infrastructure, to essentially the choice of players, and to the content that they get matched made into. All of these things are what we're sacrificing for matchmaking, and I'm really proud that New World hasn't adopted that, because if it ever does.
Yeah, and bots trivialize, yeah, like you have to fight off the bots, hands down. That's why you've seen a lot of people shy away from player-driven economies, because it requires more moderation, etc. I'm not saying the player-driven economy is the perfect solution, but I'm saying these systems interact with each another. And no, the raid, like, I would clear the raid before you would collect the 10,000 or the 10 trillion flowers, right? Like, that in and of itself is something, especially in modern MMOs with hundreds of guides, etc. Like, it's just a function of scheduling. Do you want to schedule a raid tonight? Do you want to keep working on that? I don't find and haven't found the raids to be the difficulty barrier that they have now. I haven't done Ultimate, and I know that that's going to be like, that would be like a real challenge.
That's his core difference, is that he hasn't done even like a true taste of raiding. He's gone in and cleared a, and so because he doesn't surround himself by this, he can be very dismissive of it. And that's one of the big frustrations with him, right? And so, like, if you haven't done it and you're respectful of it, that's fine. But if you're going to be dismissive, he argues with Zepla that she should have to play New World with an open mind before she's allowed to criticize. And yet he's willing to criticize the reasons raiding works the way it does, but refuses to do the same thing.
But
he didn't clear the full tier. He cleared the first 2 fights of one tier one time.
Like, where do you want to spend your time? And shouldn't you have that choice? And that all then files down into, what is an MMO? I'm advocating for what I like the MMO to be, is this other plane of existence that we get to go play in, and it's got a game associated with it. I'm not in the majority. I'm not in the majority, and that's perfectly fine for me not to be, but I'm going to reward what game appeals to me in that way with the limited time that I do have.
Criticism.
And the world is breathtaking. The game is a very social game, and this is in part because of player building and because of the player-driven economy, but it's also in the core game.
Yeah, all these systems, they interrelate, right? Like, when you take one and you just separate and say, yeah, player-driven economy, like, I don't like that. I don't want another player to have any kind of agency on my experience. And I would be like, okay, but in my worldview, that's what MMOs are. Players can try to game the economy, and it could be a positive impact on you or a negative impact on you. Like, that's a part of the appeal. But not everybody wants that, right? And that's why I advocate for more MMOs, like more different varieties for people to step into. The social aspect is also not necessarily we're all chatting, right? Like, it's feeling connected. It's the economy that connects us, the aspects that all connect us, the people running just by. When you see somebody just out in the world, the fact that we're not all locked into the content, all being instanced off. Like, if you go watch my wife Final Fantasy 14 is dying video today, like, literally we're talking about the same damn things. It was literally me telling you guys, this isn't a game for me. This is what I would love to see them do. And guess what? They didn't do it. And that's okay. Like, I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed that experience. And I feel like I beat the game. And without those 5 things that I talk about in that video, I don't know how anybody's surprised. But not everybody obviously watches every video I make, because I make a bunch of content.
Isn't pure instance simulator. Now, Final Fantasy 14 has an open world, and you participate in that open world maybe a few times, and then maybe you go and do a beast tribe or a tribal.
Just to be clear, because I know people are going to hear that Final Fantasy 14, his video is dying, and they're looking at the title, right? And so his title here is What WoW and 14 Players Struggle to Understand. Where they are not as bright as me who plays New World, no. His titles are always very like, oh my gosh, I have to know what that is. And so they're always very, very like algorithmically baity or whatever. So the Final Fantasy XIV video is dying is about, as a core concept, is this idea that there is a life cycle to you playing Final Fantasy XIV. So when you come in, it's new, it's exciting, there's an overwhelming amount of content, and then as you get settled into the game, it's filled with these patterns, and it fails to break those patterns, and it fails to challenge those patterns, and so players eventually get to where they need breaks, and they eventually get to where the game isn't the right fit for them because they become tired of it being the same things over and over and over. So it's not about the analytics say the game's more successful than ever, it just turned a record quarter. No. It's about, like, eventually, for all people, veterans will burn out of a game and move on. And so here are the things within Final Fantasy XIV that, within his opinion, cause that. Here are the things that are causing an individual's person's time with Final Fantasy XIV to come to a close. Whether or not, when that person leaves, that same day they're replaced by 5 new people. So the total analytical subscription numbers may be on the rise, but for that one particular person, the game has ended. Their time with that game has come to a close, and we see it in MMORPG communities all the time, that any game that that person is done with is called dead. You see people saying it about New World, even though New World's doing great. You see people talk about that with RuneScape, even though RuneScape's doing great. You see people talk about that with WoW, even though WoW's continuing to set numbers that no other game can hit. The moment somebody decides they don't like an MMORPG, that they are done with it, whether, in many cases, they never even started. They're like, I never played it because I knew I wouldn't like it. And so, like, but once they have decided that a game is irrelevant to them and should be ignored to them, and that they would not click on any video and have any open mind about that game to them, then that game is dead. That word gets thrown out as dead, and that becomes this way of dismissing a game. Whether or not any standard definition of, is it turning a profit? Is it growing? Is there an active player base? Is that player base big enough to cause there to be new content introduced? Are the devs making a full-time living at it? Are there communities formed around it? Any of those definitions that would generate actual liveliness for the people that are involved, that entire community doesn't mean anything to you, and therefore the game as a whole can be called dead. And so when he talked about Final Fantasy XIV is dying, he talked about, like, what are the things that causes an individual person's journey within Final Fantasy XIV to come to an end, and some things about the game that he would hope they would change formulaically moving forward. And over the time since that video is published, he hasn't. Now, a ton of comments on that video saw the title, and then they go take some screenshot of Final Fantasy XIV just hit 27 million players, and they go, ha 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 ha, you are an idiot. What do you mean, Ted? The most people are playing it right now. Therefore, good. And then you say to those very same people, World of Warcraft is 4 times the size of Final Fantasy XIV. World of Warcraft has impacted over 130 million players to Final Fantasy's 29 million. Yeah, but that game's garbage. It's dead. It's dead. It's dead. That's what he's talking about. What makes a game move into that state where it is something that you can no longer relate or care about? It does not matter if 1 million people you will never meet or interact with like it. What makes it dead to you?
Quest in one of the zones, but in New World it's all integrated.
We are all struggling to say tribal quest instead of beast trap.
Open world dungeons, and you have the instance.
And I do think that this is another valid criticism of FF14, is the open world. The open world,
Beautiful, and they abandon it.
There could be more to make it feel more alive outside of hunt trains, fates, and gathering. Those are the main open world activities to keep people out.
Hunt trains, fates, and gathering. Just to put a brief aside on what Zepla's saying here, hunt trains, fates, and gathering are 3 pieces of content Brian does not do. He caps his gatherers and he's done. So if he does that via leave quest or something, you could do that in a single day. You could cap Fisher without ever leaving town. Fates, Brian doesn't really see the reason to do. The bicolor gemstones got him really excited when it was added, but I do not believe he's capped all the zones in Endwalker, so I don't believe he's interacted with, like, let's go get that mount, and let's talk about what Blue Mage means within these things. And when a relic goes into a fate step, let's assume the Endwalker one goes into a fate step, that's not going to mean anything to Brian because the relic is not best in slot until the end of expansion. Even though it is really freaking good, it doesn't matter. It's not BIS. And so he's going to view the relic as it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the expansion, it's going to get tossed in the trash. And along the way, it's not this until the very last patch. So, and they're going to nerf the amount of work that goes into a relic as we go. So he'll typically wait in an expansion that he's going to play all the way through. If he's going to engage with the relic, he'll typically wait until one of the last steps and then try to play catch up where it's heavily nerfed. And then the last one is hunts. Brian doesn't cap tomes. I haven't really capped tomes since Heavensward until patch 6.2. I decided I wanted to try this out, and it's drastically changed my opinion of Final Fantasy XIV. I'd probably feel differently if I kept capping tomes the entire time since then, but as somebody who's just now recently started capping tomes again, I'm finding hunts really, really fun. It's fun to be around that many players. It does feel like the open world is alive, so that's why she names it. But those are 3 examples of things that simply do not impact Brian. So she can say those things, and, like, that can literally just blow by either of his 2 facial expressions there. They don't matter. And he's not alone in that. There are a lot of people that do not cap fates. There are a lot of people that don't craft or gather. There are a lot of people that don't do tribal quests or side quests in a zone. There are a lot of people that don't go back and do things like sightseeing logs. There are a lot of people that do not cap their tomes every week, and if they do it through another source. They go run maps, they go run PvP, they do expert roulettes, and so they don't use the open world on something like hunt trains, because they got everything they want from sacks of nuts and they're done.
Maybe a few times, and then maybe you go and do a beast tribe or a tribal quest in one of the zones. But in New World, it's all integrated.
We are all struggling to say tribal quest instead of beast tribe.
Open world dungeons, and you have the instance.
And I do think that this is another valid criticism of FF14, is the open world. The open world,
It's beautiful, and they abandon it.
There could be more to make it feel more alive outside of hunt trains, fates, and gathering. Those are the main open world activities to keep people outside and doing stuff. After playing Guild Wars 2, though, I feel like there's never going to be a game that lives up to what Guild Wars 2 offers in open world. Like, the open world is absolutely amazing in Guild Wars 2.
Yeah, Guild Wars 2 is amazing.
Like the whole game is built around the open world as that being its heart and soul. Like, all the exploration, all the progression that I've been doing so far has just been about exploring and wandering around. All the mounts are there to, like, play into this immersive sense of, oh, well, now I'm underwater, or now I'm out here going, and I need this type of mount for this type of terrain. That's fucking cool. So that's something Guild Wars 2 does extremely well, and now I have that new perspective after playing Guild Wars, that, like, I feel like any other MMO or game that I play, the open world is going to seem like crap compared to that. Like,
I like that they have a balance
genuinely.
between the 2.
Yeah, Guild Wars 2 has a really well done open world because it makes it easy to jump in. It actually tries to filter people into the zones. Because guess what? People like it, even if you're not playing with other people, it feels good to see and be a part of that. When you run in the city, when you're out, especially in this game, in New World, when you're out in the world and it's quiet and you're kind of isolated, and then all of a sudden some people just come up on you, and you're like, oh my gosh, that was cool. Like, it is truly, really kind of cool. And finally, and Guild Wars 2, absolutely. Some of the things that Guild Wars 2 does, I keep putting in as feedback for New World specifically. I think Guild Wars 2 does a really, really good job. That's why I like Guild Wars 2 so much.
And my personal fear and my feedback to the devs will always be, don't introduce a raid without introducing an open world raid. New World has an open world raid. In fact, you can do all these different things.
Now, how is the open world in New World? You said New World's open world looks incredible, but without the content in it, that only gets you so far. So it looks really good, but what about, like, world bosses? Is there that kind of stuff? What do you say? New World? Yeah, look. I don't want to get off on a whole tangent.
I've been playing New World on average across a 7-day period over the last week or so. I've been playing New World on average somewhere between 1 and 6 hours a day. When it comes to open world content, it does not offer more variety than Final Fantasy XIV long term. Ultimately, I am gathering, I am PvPing, I am attacking things in the world, or I am questing. And the moment you get beyond the main scenario quest, which is admittedly substantially better than it was on launch, I am not enjoying the fact that I can just jump city to city to city and pick up all the faction quests that are basically kill a bear, gather some fish meat, or go to specific locations and do one of the following basic quest things. I don't find that any more engaging than any other MMO. I don't find it any less engaging than any other MMO. So as an MMORPG player, there is a baseline of that I just tolerate and consider base gameplay. But I do not feel that New World is doing anything that another game is not. There is their own unique spin on it, I guess, but it's effectively the same thing. You pick up a quest, which is kill. You gotta kill the bears, gather the bear butts, or go in and grab something the bears are protecting. And that is what every quest that is not tied to a base scenario is tied to in an MMORPG, and New World is no different. It is prettier, and it is new. But how will it feel when I've been playing this for 10 years? So a lot of what I'm hearing him say here is that what Final Fantasy players don't get is that New World is new.
About how fantastic Guild Wars 2 is, because I feel like I do that every single day. But like other games would definitely it wouldn't hurt to take a few pages from Guild Wars 2.
They can't.
Guild Wars the 2.
Sure they can.
And it looks like
they can't. What do you mean they can't? Yoshi P told Brian and I to our face that they cannot build a trust style system for ARR dungeons. He said it was impossible. It is impossible, and people now do it every day. They absolutely can. Bozja Zadnor reinvented what a fate meant, and Mr. Happy said, could we do that in the open world? And Yoshi P said it is impossible. But I guarantee we could absolutely get there. We could absolutely get there. What he means is it would take a lot of time. We absolutely can build a more intriguing open world. The Bicolor Gemstone Edition was a massive upgrade to Fates. The removal of Battle Class Leaves drastically changed the way we interact with the open world. Side quests moving to being something that can level sync so that they remain relevant, no matter what level you want to enter that zone, was a massive change to the way that we go through the open world on alts. We can absolutely make it function to the degree that Guild Wars does. Guild Wars zones have vistas, which is the sightseeing log. They have exploration through points of interest, which is the aether currents. They have waypoints, which are aetherites that we have to attune to. They have a story through that zone, which is a story through that zone. They have side quests and repeatable side quests in that zone, which are side quests and tribal quests. They have rare spawn events, which are fates. All of these things in Guild Wars 2 can exist. Guild Wars 2 just does them deeper and wider and in a larger quantity that is more relevant in more ways. So when you take something like the hunt system and you make it a brilliant source of current in-game tomes, current non-capable tomes, and a new currency, people go do hunts. And they have a lot of fun doing it. There's vibe trains, there's bullet trains, they have a blast. When Blue Mage got added, people went out in the world and tore the world up. They absolutely can. It is not, well, Guild Wars started in 2012, we're never gonna catch them now. Yes, you can. Final Fantasy, if they want to make the New World a priority, absolutely can. That is a choice, that is a priority. I'm not saying they should, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I am saying they can.
Get out of here! Who's stressed? Who? That's y'all's chest that's beating, and your eyes that are watering a little bit. Yeah, your mouth is dry. It's fine.
Auroria, thanks for 5 months.
Yeah, look, I don't want to get off on a whole tangent about how fantastic Guild Wars 2 is, because I feel like I do that every single day. But like other games would definitely it wouldn't hurt to take a few pages from Guild Wars 2.
They can't.
Guild Wars the 2's books, and it looks like Blizzard team is already starting to do that.
Final Fantasy 14 cannot do what Guild Wars does.
Forest. But the non-forest areas are not.
It would like it requires a 14-2 or a Realm Reborn for them to draw inspiration from Guild Wars. Yeah, Heaven's Word is by far the best. I still think Heaven's Word, I see chat talking about Heaven's Word. It's like, it is, I think, by far the best experience. When Stormblood came out, I thought there was an opportunity for them to utilize the open world a little bit more, tell this story. Shadowbringers was a great story. I really enjoyed diving deep into the lore, and Endwalker for me was a conclusion. It was a great bookend. I would have made some narrative changes personally, but I'm not going to judge them, on that. That's the choice. Those are the choices.
He's only speaking narratively right now. Stormblood released by far the largest quantity of content, the largest quantity of things to do. Even when you define it only as open world, it added things like gigging. Stormblood was by far the largest quantity of content that was delivered on a regular basis. Every 112 days, we got an incredible amount of content. But the story was not as moving to Brian and many others as Heavensward, and not as important to Brian and many others as Shadowbringers and Endwalker. Stormblood is often dismissed, but since we are on the conversation of content, Stormblood was king. To the point where I don't think Stormblood was sustainable on the internal team, and I think that's why we saw Yoshi P saying he was going to take care of his devs, and we've never gotten back to that level of content that often across that many systems that rapidly. Endwalker, with more resources than ever before, is getting close to the same amount of content, but it is a bigger team. Stormblood is massive.
Choice and story beats that they made, cool. But it was in Stormblood when all of a sudden you're running around in the open world and you don't see anybody. Go watch that video. Go watch why Final Fantasy 14 is dying. It literally is me saying, like, guys, like, here's the stuff. Here's what I need. You know, and so, like, in a way, we're kind of rehashing this where it's like, oh, turns out this new game delivers on it.
You can't swim.
You couldn't swim in Final Fantasy 14 for 7 years. I don't know why Final Fantasy 14 players point that out.
Swimming is not even the bar now. Like, swimming is that's like nothing. It's like the bare minimum. It's below the bare minimum. Like, not only do I now expect to be able to swim underwater in the open world, but I need to be able to have, like, a underwater mount, underwater pet, underwater abilities, underwater weapons.
An open world, that is a big aspect of Final Fantasy 11.
I have yet to hear anybody actually talk about, like, swimming-based content in an MMO in a positive way. I think Guild Wars 2 still does it best, but when I talk to people within the Guild Wars 2 community, they hate it. So I understand people wanting to swim. I would rather there be a mount that kind of make that possible, because, like, I'm in full heavy armor. Like, I am going to sink to the bottom. I love the immersiveness of this game. If they add swimming to New World, I will not shed a tear. Okay, it's there. Cool. But I actually rather enjoy that the water is dangerous, that it changes how you traverse. I would love to see things like Guild Wars, like a glider. I put that feedback in today. There's so much verticality to this game and how it's all connected and cohesive and no zone lines. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Chris says that she clearly likes the underwater system. I'm just generally curious because I also have said that I like the underwater system in Guild Wars. I like you have different skills. I like that you can travel. Like, I've always enjoyed that from especially a verticality perspective. And if she also is in that same boat, again, like when I talk to Guild Wars community about it and people say they don't like it, like I haven't met anybody else who said that because it was always me saying I like it. I wonder if there's a time thing on this because like maybe I haven't played the game enough to not like it. Maybe she hasn't played the game enough not to like it. I honestly don't know. And like she said at the beginning, like we should just get together and have a conversation, and that might be a lot of fun.
Guild Wars 2 is bar none the single best underwater content in any MMORPG ever. Period. Hands down. Best in class, pinnacle. There is no game that handles exploration better. There is no game that handles the way you move through it better. There is no game that handles combat better. There is no game that makes it feel like a more unique and more valid and interesting part of the world. They have an underwater fractal dungeon. It is bar none the single best underwater combat system ever introduced, ever managed, ever continually made relevant in an MMO. And it is still hot, flaming garbage. You are absolutely the shiniest dung on the dung heap, and if there is an underwater quest that I have to do for world completion, it will absolutely be the very last thing I complete in a zone. I despise it with my entire being. It is the best of something I don't want to eat.
And I hope that we can also draw inspiration from what made Final Fantasy XI great. I'd love to see Final Fantasy XI features brought into Final Fantasy XIV, but that's also one of those really big asks that really isn't practical unless they decided just to make a brand new MMORPG, and that's what I am hoping for.
How would you compare FF11's open world to FF14's open world?
Even today, it's
Big
breathtaking.
calls for the FF11 open world.
Even today, I would say that the Final Fantasy XI open world is breathtaking for its time, right? Like when playing New World, it's like how I imagine the 11 world could be if they had that.
Anybody have some nostalgia glasses we can put over him here? Anybody got some, do we need some rose glasses here that I can put on when people talk like this?
Kind of budget and technology,
Do we have
right?
that? Do we have that?
You know, for a PS2 game,
No?
I think 11 is still breathtaking
No
to this day.
nostalgia glasses?
Yeah, of course. I mean, any industry is going to build upon the shoulders of those who came before, of the people that, the games and the people and the ideas that came before that were really good, that everybody liked, that shouldn't just be, forgotten. You said it's the same, really? I hated FF11 open world. After level 10, you have to be in the group or you're dead.
So what that did is actually fostered a community of empathy. It's not for everybody, right? Like all of a sudden it's like, well, I really didn't want to play with other people. Like I think there is a balance. I think New World actually strikes that balance. It's better and it's more fun when I'm playing with other people, but it's also kind of nice to kind of pick up and play and just kind of go and, like, yeah, sometimes maybe I get my butt handed to me. So it's nice that there's no level down experience here. So there's definitely things that I think 11 Remake could modernize that would be very positive overall for the community. But one of the things that it did was it made us work together. You survive together or die alone. And that created and fostered such a strong community, such a strong love for each other that you were like, if somebody died, like you legitimately felt bad. It connected people. And the one character playing all jobs also helped build out a reputation. There was a natural reputation system that you weren't a jerk, because guess what? You didn't get match made with anybody. Like you're going to need them to be able to do this stuff later.
One person having a reputation in Final Fantasy XI is something that makes it distinct is absolutely true in New World and in Final Fantasy. You are one person, and the amount of effort it takes to spin up a meaningfully relevant alt is substantial. The vast majority of people in New World and in Final Fantasy, only 2 games on trial here today, the vast majority have one meaningful character.
There,
FF11 open world, a lot like Eureka.
Oh, they made a lot of changes to
There's
11.
some charm to that. I did like in Eureka feeling like there were parts of the map that if I wander in there on accident, I'm going to be absolutely fucked. Like, I will be destroyed. I will be a little stain on the bottom of some...
Oh, and I'm not advocating for, like, bringing back XP on death, guys. Like, I legitimately remember getting to a level, being able to finally equip some really new gear that I earned because I was crafting and gathering and stuff, and legitimately was like, all right, equip that gear. I went out and I got my butt kicked. Leveled down. I had to sell my previous gear just to afford the new stuff. And then I was kind of like, thankfully, again, people were nice, right? Like you kind of like, hey, I'll pay you back. And, I have my new gear, but I cannot equip it because of the level down. So I'm not advocating that level down become a system that comes back. However, there's other ways of facilitating kind of like it's not necessarily like discouraging risk, because risk is fine, but it's encouraging, like it's not like, oh, let's just not keep YOLOing.
If you rely on other players, it encourages player meta. This comment right here from Arcanoloth. This comment right here. A friend of mine was playing a class that was not in meta and it was bad. They were looking for group on his Dragoon for 3 days straight when he quit 11. Like, that's what happens. So what he's talking about here is directly in conflict. He says that he doesn't want a meta in games, but that he wants people to be interacting with each other, right? That the things people do interact with each other. Since meta comes from players, the more player interaction there is, the more meta is. So when you talk about games that are exclusively player interaction, things like MOBAs. MOBAs are exclusively player interaction, and the meta and the mindset becomes overbearingly toxic. You have to play one way, to the point where the big solution in MOBAs now has been to continue to restrict how chat works in these games to the point where there basically isn't one. Because that's player interaction is everything. So what he's calling for, and I don't want a meta, but I do want player interaction, those are directly in conflict with each other. Not based on the way he plays, but the way a whole collection of people play. The more players rely on each other, the more each other's opinions affect each other. I don't want you to play the way you're playing, because the way you're playing affects me. If the way you're playing only affects you, I don't care. go into whatever content you want, geared however you want, and die. It's not my problem. But if you're going to be in my group, and if you screw up, I die, I need you to step it up.
This, let's take some kind of thoughts, etc. But I don't know. I think New World actually has a really good striking balance with it, because you obviously have gear durability. There's a cost there, and that's fine. There can be a cost, but beyond gear durability, then it's like you still end up. Oh, one of my items is broken.
Job solos or Zerg. I like this as a danger. Like, it reminds me leveling in Wrath.
I'll talk about the people who counter with like, oh, it's just going to be a Zerg. It's a variety-based piece of content. Open world content is variety at its core, because yes, it might be a Zerg, or it might be you and a buddy. It might just be you. It might be 10 people. The content is always going to be different because of how people approach the content. And so we see that happening all the time in New World. We see it happening all the time in New World. Depends on how people play, right? And so it's like when you have an open world content, you have a level of unpredictability. That's why my hope for New World is that we don't see it migrate purely to, I don't want to see it become purely instant simulator. I'm fine with instance content, but balance it out. Introduce an instant content, introduce more open world content, instance content, open world dungeons, open world raid. Like, those things are awesome. You see kind of the players having their own open world raid in New World. It's going to be great to have an instance one. Now, maybe that also then influences that we can have UI that kind of facilitates that out in the open world too, right? So you can end up kind of building that out and go from there. And yeah, exactly. I think Guild Wars 2 is a really good shining example. It's weird to me that Guild Wars 2 isn't more popular than it is overall.
The Lich King. You said he's leaving out some vital details to make the point fall apart. Like what? So what kind of details do you feel that he is leaving out here? So it comes down to he wants to be able to get BIS without having to raid to get it. Well, I also would like that. That sounds really good, because I'm lazy, and I would like to have.
I don't think using the economy and actually like leveling up and being a part of that is considered even lazy. It's just the choice in how you want to spend your time in the game. Right now, when you have, this is how you progress, this is how it's done, that choice is taken away from you, the player, and it's put into that avenue. In fact, and I think, and I'd still argue that it reduces, player empathy. We're not seeing a lot of empathy in terms of like, oh, I need you. We don't, in the modern MMO right now, outside of the new batch that's coming up, it's like the idea that needing another player is so infrequent, even if it's not like I like also when the MMOs have a very passive asynchronous, connection. You don't have to always be engaging, always be, etc. The game and the systems kind of facilitate that in the back end. Final Fantasy 11 is a great example of this with the conquest system as well. But we've seen MMOs shift from, again, back to my point on, is another player an opportunity, or are they a cost? And
so he's arguing that players should need each other to get access to the gear?
In terms of like, oh, I need you. We don't... It
comes down to he wants to be able to get BIS without having to raid to get it. Well, I also would like that. That sounds really good, because I'm lazy, and...
She implies that the act of getting Savage gear, the act of challenging yourself through that hard content is work, and therefore getting it from another source is less work. Which it's just different, right? The idea of grinding the Relic versus Savage is a great example. There are a lot of Savage Raiders that don't engage with the Relic system because they find that grind very boring. But it is work. Now, it is not as difficult of work, but in trade for that, the total quantity of work rises. So you have to do, a lot of hours to get one or more relics, or you have to progress. And so, like, I don't know that lazy is the right word choice. And today, like, he has been very, like, words have been really the point of this post. He has said that words matter. And he said it, and he's shown it when he picks on a single word of hers, that words matter. So let's go through and, like, listen to some of his words on this, because I think there's something interesting here.
I would like to have...
I don't think using the economy and actually like leveling up and being a part of that is considered even lazy. It's just the choice in how you want to spend your time in the game. Right now, when you have, this is how you progress, this is how it's done, that choice is taken away from you, the player, and it's put into that avenue. In fact, and I think, and I'd still argue that it reduces, player empathy. We're not seeing a lot of empathy in terms of like, oh, I need you. We don't, in the...
Okay, so the argument is because there is less player choice, because Savage is the only avenue to best in slot gear in Final Fantasy versus New World, where he feels that he can get it from more sources, that you're losing player empathy as a result of choice, and that the downstream result of that is that players do not need each other. And yet, the best in slot gear is only available if you can find 7 other people to get the clear. And so it has generated entire communities of people that help first-time raiders through ultimates, through savages, through extremes. We have had charity events as a community that are entirely driven about how many first-time clears can we get. So I don't disagree that Final Fantasy does not have a lot of choice on how to get to true Bis. I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree that when a group of players play one way and a group of players plays another way, if those are very separated, that you lose empathy because you lose the ability to understand people who play differently than you because you are so separate from them. And the less interaction players have, the easier it is to dismiss people that play differently. What I disagree with is the downstream result where he now says, because of the lack of choice, there is a lack of empathy. And because of the lack of empathy, players do not need each other. And they absolutely do still need each other. Quite specifically, they need each other. If it was just crafted gear, I could go onto the market board and buy off somebody anonymously. It does not matter to me who that person is or how they got the item. And then I could craft that gear for myself and be Bis, and I could do that effectively alone. There is no direct, meaningful player-to-player interaction in that entire transaction. None.
Modern MMO right now, outside of the new batch that's coming up, it's like the idea that needing another player is so infrequent. Even if it's not like I like also when the MMOs have a very passive asynchronous, connection. You don't have to always be engaging, always be, etc. The game and the systems kind of facilitate that in the back end. Final Fantasy XI is a great example of this with the conquest system as well. But we've seen MMOs shift from, again, back to my point on, is another player an opportunity or are they a cost? And I get frustrated when it's like, this is the only way to go about it. I want there to be raid content. I want there to be that difficult and challenging content. I advocate for it, especially when I get frustrated when people say like, oh, they're taking away from glamour or housing or whatever to make a new raid. It's like, of course, like that's a good thing. Especially the raiders within 14 have suffered the most with the COVID. Like they had the biggest delays in raiding content all around.
The countless exploits and duping exploits that destroy the economy. Yeah, he did leave that out. That's true.
Bind on equip I don't have an issue with bind on equip. Bind on pickup bothers me, and that also bothers me in New World as well. So yeah, like it's bind on equip is like if you get the item and you equip it, you know what? Then it's yours. You need a gear sync because the world has endless resources. It's all digital, right? So that helps simulate kind of the real world use and destruction. But bind on pickup, that's where I get frustrated. And New World has that, and I don't like that New World has that for everything. I think for if you use it very rarely, I think there could be a value there. But I remember there's like quest items that you could get and you could put on the market. They're not a guaranteed drop for a quest item, but people can go farm those up, put them on the market, make money. And if you want, you have money, you can just go buy the quest item, or you can go try and go farm it. Like, again, that's just driving what way you want to go about it.
Why do you need
So what does bind on pickup do versus bind on equip? Bind on equip obviously offers value to you or value to another player who would be willing to barter with you to get that, either by exchanging gold or exchanging something else in trade for getting that loot. Bind on equip obviously fosters a lot of variety. So why would you not just always have bind on equip? That's kind of Brian's point. Brian is saying, why does any game have bind on pickup as a concept? Why does any game? The reason bind on pickup exists is because in an MMORPG, you do want there to be things that prove and reward an actual player interacting with an actual system. And so, for example, if you add a new piece of content that is different than you've ever done before, Final Fantasy XIV just added Criterion Dungeons and Island Sanctuary. New World has had these seasonal events. Something is added to the game that is unique, that is meant to be a unique experience. One of the ways you might encourage people to go into that experience is that you put something that is bind on pickup, something that is non-tradable, because then somebody goes, but I want that thing. And the only way to get it is to go try that content. So, Brian uses the word a lot. It is an invitation. It is an invitation sent out to you to say, hey, I have something really cool over here, and if you want it, you just need to come try this system out. And if you do try this system out, this is waiting for you at the end. And so if along the way you run into some friction. Maybe you're struggling to understand one of the mechanics. Maybe you're struggling to execute one of the mechanics. You can push through that knowing that there is a carrot at the end of that, right? I'm willing to push over these moments where it's hard and it's frustrating and I'm using foul language and I'm angry and I'm slapping my desk and my wife comes in and goes, "Are you even having fun?" And you're like, yeah, leave me alone. Yes, I'm having fun. I'm gonna get this thing. That is what Bind on Pickup offers first and foremost, is a reward for doing things. Now, if that's the case, why would we not just put 1 or 2 rewards behind a system, and once people get it, stop putting Bind on Pickup? Final Fantasy XIV, for example, makes pretty much all dungeons Bind on Pickup. The other thing that Bind on Pickup does is it guarantees scarcity. This is a word that Brian used earlier. And so what happens is if all the gear in the world is available constantly. For example, in Final Fantasy XIV, as you level, all the gear from dungeons becomes something that's tradable. Then all of a sudden, there is a lot of loot being generated that has very little use. And so when you have items that have a niche use, maybe they're a piece of leveling gear that's only used for a brief time, it's a quest reward that's really only useful in a particular way. If all of a sudden that stuff is all not market prohibited all of the time, it's all something that can be sold, then now the market floods with those items. And so as somebody that appreciates crafters and gatherers having value in an economy, what I would say to Brian is that protects crafters and gatherers. And so that is effectively the same as when governments put taxes on incoming goods from foreign countries. And so these happen all the time. The consumer is the one that ends up paying for them. But ultimately what ends up happening is you say that when that good comes into the States, there will be an extra tax put on it as it comes in to whatever country you live in. And the consumer will end up having that lumped into their finalized price. And it will artificially prop up demand for the domestic good. It will prop up demand for something that is locally produced. And so what that allows for is by making all dungeon loot in Final Fantasy XIV not something that can be traded on the market board, now all of a sudden when somebody's leveling an alt class and they run into a gap in gear and they feel like, you know what, it'd be nice to have a new chest piece that is approximately appropriate for my level range, just to get me to the next time that one becomes easily available from the methods I normally get gear, I can go to the market board and I can buy one, and that item has value because the amount of supply is more in line with the amount of demand. There's only a handful of people doing that, so we don't need it to flood or those will crash into the ground. And so by limiting dungeon loot, we have artificially allowed crafters and gatherers and the handful of sources of tradable loot to continue to have value in Final Fantasy XIV. So it is a subsidy to the very people he's saying should have value sooner than level cap. It is what allows crafters and gatherers and people who do find tradable gear that's available at that level range to have value, whether it's from a leave quest or whatever. It is what provides them with value. So the very reason Bind on Pickup is there is because of something else Brian wants.
This, if you're not raising, you don't. It's just to feel good that you checked all.
That's where, again, like, this is a completely French and German kind of problem right now, because who cares? Who cares? Like, why is that an issue?
They care. Who cares? You're asking who cares. They care. Like he's saying because he doesn't care, who cares? The answer, who cares, whether or not raid loot is available on BIS. Let's listen to this again.
As well. So yeah, like, it's Bind on Equip is like, if you get the item and you equip it, you know what, then it's yours. You need a gear sync because the world has endless resources. It's all digital, right? So that helps simulate kind of the real world use and destruction. But Bind on Pickup, that's where I get frustrated. And New World has that, and I don't like that New World has that for everything. I think for like if you use it very rarely, I think there could be a value there. But I remember, like, you know, there's like quest items that you could get and you could put on the market. They're not a guaranteed drop for a quest item, but people can go farm those up, put them on the market, make money. And you, if you want, you have money, you can just go buy the quest item, or you can go try and go farm it. Like, again, that's just driving how you want, what way you want to go about it.
Why do you need BIS if you're not raising? You don't. It's just to feel good that you checked all.
That's where, again, like, this is
why do you need BIS if you're not raiding? And she says, you don't. It's just to make you feel good.
a completely French and German kind of problem right now, because who cares? Who cares? Like, why is that an issue?
The raiders who like that they have unique rewards to reward them for engaging in their system. That's who cares. That's who cares. It is exactly the same as when people dismiss something that Brian says because it doesn't impact them. Who cares? The people on the opposite side. That's who cares. So that's the answer to that question.
If I want to go about and get BIS,
Yep.
and I want to go, craft countless amounts of, items for the community and the economy and
Sure.
gather 1 trillion items, etc. Like, shouldn't that be my choice to do that?
Yep. Sure.
I think that's where the economy,
And it is up to the point of crafted gear. The highest item level available from dungeons, which is the content that everybody has to clear whether they like it or not, is lower than crafted gear, and crafted gear has a unique property that it can receive more stat boosting materia than anything else. And crafted gear full pentamelded is capable of clearing all content currently released. Always. Every time there is content added to the game that is not clearable by the highest level of crafted gear, new crafted gear is added. So what he's calling for does exist. Crafted pentameld gear is incredibly powerful. Brian does not craft his own crafted pentameld gear. He does not meld his own pentamelded gear. He pays people for it. So it's not that he likes the act of crafting. It's not that he likes the act of melding. He wants the ability to trade his gil for the gear. My understanding is he always paid for it. I know he's been given it by community members. I think he's always paid them. So what he's calling for does exist. He's just mad that there's a bonus level of gear that honestly doesn't even really matter to raiders that can clear it in crafted gear. And the tome gear acts as a soft nerf in making things just a little bit easier, but that is widely available to everybody. You can get tomes to grant the tome gear from doing anything end-game related. Anything end-game related. So what he's calling for does exist. It just doesn't exist in exactly the way he wants it to. But I believe that in New World, if you give New World a few more years, and you let Brian approach the end of it, as he's already stated, when people start to tell him that he doesn't have the right stuff, and he goes, whatever, it's the same thing. He just may feel that that's a fringe minority, but as more and more people have level 60 characters with all their weapons capped and access to all of the current gear score loot, it will be the exact same thing. So what he's calling for is an intrinsic problem with MMORPG communities that have been around a while. It has nothing to do with the difference between New World and Final Fantasy XIV.
like all of these things all relate together. I think that's where economy balances the scales, because it hurts their feelings. You could still have things as a trophy. I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you just want to look cool. Who gives a shit? I don't care about glamour. I don't.
Yes, you do, because he has said before that ultimate weapons should be sellable. He absolutely wants trophies to not be locked away as well. So he's saying that here in this context because he doesn't care about glamour, but I have heard him say that New World weapons should be sellable.
I'm not that. That's never been my appeal. But if that is something I know that's important for people, you can still lock looks, because you still go get your BIS and then you go glamour the crap out of it. You're not even showing off how it looks. The design of the gear people haven't really been chasing that look overall behind that, because all of a sudden the glamour ends up being more important. How people look ends up being more important. And that is in and of itself kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy. So yeah, I don't care if their feelings are hurt. Why are their feelings hurt? They did the thing. And fact is, the reality, I from every, like the people I've heard from and some of the interesting conversations I've had, people still go and spend real money and get that clear. I don't know how their feelings aren't hurt by that.
The focus on the 1% of people that are breaking terms of service just shouldn't have an effect on either side. Like arguing against, well, there's RMT in this game. There's RMT in every game. So like that is just not a good argument for either game. That makes no difference. Saying that we should adjust traffic laws because there are some people that drive with drugs in their car, like it doesn't. If we are now going to get to where people can just ignore the very rules put down by the devs, people that use aimbots, people that cheat, people that have not allowed add-ons, if we're going to start ignoring the rules, then nothing matters. So I would say just take that all the way off the table. Just take that all the way off. Who cares about the armed tiers? That is something between the people doing the illicit activity and the people who are policing the illicit activity to deal with. It does not affect me because I don't do any of those things.
As opposed to somebody, again, all of this is interrelated. When you don't have those experiences in the past or the MMO, I can see how like people don't understand what I'm talking about, but we're speaking two different languages because we think of view the MMO in and of itself in two completely different terms. I'm not looking for a thing to do. I'm looking for a place to kind of relax. And that doesn't mean relaxing isn't hard content. I'm just looking for a place to, like another place.
It does mean that. It does mean that. It does mean that. He is looking for a place to relax, not a thing to do. Means he is inherently not playing for BIS. So there are people playing New World the same way that the very people he does not like playing Final Fantasy play that. It absolutely, those are the same thing. Fishing a trillion times is not as hard as the hardest raid in the game. It may take as many hours, it may take more hours, but it is just objectively not difficult. It is about doing a simple task and doing it over and over and over and over. There's nothing hard.
Is to be, you know, it's my bar. This is where I go.
BIS to be purchasable on the auction house in World of Warcraft. That ended up being really controversial because of people that were just using the WoW tokens with their real money to swipe and then go buy it from the auction house directly, the BIS item. So
The question then is that just because it's you don't see it actually happening in 14, that it's okay? That's not okay. I don't think somebody should be able to swipe their credit card and do that. But they still do, right? RMT still does. These people still exist.
I feel like there's a good reason to make the best available gear from the most high effort content. I think that's the way that things should be. It makes sense that the best gear should...
And the best gear, materials, could be from that content, thus requiring the system to work together for the goal of getting better, as opposed to the gear just drops. And then at some point, why run it again, right? But if you could run it and you could make lots of money, you're empowering yourself for the future.
I usually don't require a big reward to feel motivated to do something, like something really small. It doesn't have to be BIS all the time, though. Like, little rewards are usually fine. Isn't all BIS in New World crafted?
Not all of it. There's some that drops off of things, but also this kind of back. I'm gonna pause.
Special attributes and procs.
So when it comes down to it, there is still personal BIS. That's something that I don't ever see and hear about.
No, it's not.
In other MMOs, but we hear about it in New
Because it's not real.
World. The devs have actually talked about it. Personal BIS. And that ties.
No, there is no such thing. The moment you say there's personal BIS in every game. Because now you are talking about, here is the content that is available to me, here are my objectives, here's my willingness to pursue the things that reward and loot, and I am going to reach the peak of what is available within my Venn diagram, and I'm going to stop. And you can do that in any game you want. You don't have to finish any game. You could start any single player RPG and you could go, how far can I get in 20 hours? And then you could delete the game. And that could be your personal best clear, your personal speed run. The moment you make something personal, it is totally an opinion. Totally an opinion, and it does not matter. There is no personal BIS in an MMORPG that replaces BIS as determined by the meta. Because BIS is not an opinion. It's math. It's math. It's who can clear the furthest or deepest thing, and if everybody can clear an identically far or deep thing, then it is who can clear it the fastest, period. Because it is the best. I go out running by myself, and I set a personal record pretty regularly, because I'm wildly out of shape. And so I am coming up on, I just cracked under 30 minutes on my 5K. That is my personal best. My personal best 5K time is 29 minutes and 2 seconds. That is my personal best. But it is not the best 5K in the world. The best 5K in the world is an objectively measurable thing. That does not take away from how proud I am of my journey and how hard I will run when I go running next. Because that is based on my personal journey. But I don't get to suddenly say, because I have a personal best, that replaces BIS. BIS is BIS is BIS. Period. It is objectively measurable. And it can be done in any game. Go look at games done quickly. That does not mean it has to define your experience. But if you're starting to say best, the goal is to have an objective measure. There is no personal BIS in New World because there is no personal BIS in any video game. Because the moment it's personal, it's opinionated anyway, and who cares? So that does not replace. The BIS community is looking for the thing that does the best.
It's back into builds, that ties into the economy, that ties into all of this. So there's definitely things that might be really valuable.
Little rewards are usually fine. Isn't all bits in New World crafted?
Not all of it. There's some that it drops off of things, but also this kind of back. I'm gonna pause.
Special attributes and procs.
So when it comes down to it, there is still personal BIS. That's something that I don't ever see and hear about in other MMOs, but we hear about it in New World. The devs have actually talked about it. Personal BIS. And that ties back into builds, that ties into the economy, that ties into all of this. So there's definitely things that might be really valuable, but guess what? Like, there's also synergy in BIS.
Just to be clear, Yoshi P also says you can clear all content as all classes. That's the same statement. You can clear it your way. That doesn't replace the fact that the community found BIS.
So I could have something that I personally enjoy more, and it makes me more effective, and I'm not subject to the meta because I'm not match made into it. Matchmaking would make meta way more powerful in this game and would ruin it in my mind, because then you have to, there's a hefty cost. There's a hefty cost.
Matchmaking does not determine BIS, because the devs want everybody to play their way. So they will set the minimum bar, and that will be the amount to get match made, and then they will penalize you from withdrawing from the matchmaking system. So you will be in with a random assortment at anybody that is above the bar that the devs set. The meta is determined by players and is substantially stricter than anything the devs put on the game, because the meta is looking at optimizing. Matchmaking does not drive meta. Player grouping drives meta. Player interaction drives meta. Because one player beats another player. They therefore take options out of the second player's toolkit unless that second player is willing to always lose. The moment one player can do anything that another player cannot, that drives meta. Matchmaking is a leveling of the playing field, because now everybody's getting access to match-made rewards, and I can be paired with people that are substantially worse than me. Matchmaking does not drive meta. There are problems, there are pros and cons to a matchmaking system. It does not affect meta.
To that level of convenience.
That are dungeon only in New World. New World crafting is not easy. Okay.
Thank you. Like, people are like, oh, you just want this easy stuff.
So
what's
if you're
easy?
saying that, crafting it is a nightmare difficulty. The highest level of content should give you glamour, and the achievable highest level of content for the other 99% of players should be BIS.
Yeah, I'm fine if you want to look behind a difficult raid. Like, that's perfectly fine.
You really need BIS. No, you don't. But it makes sense that a player on an RPG progression timeline wants to see the numbers on their gear go up. Like, they want to see the item level get the best.
If you're gonna have a vertical,
sense of, like, satisfaction.
If you're gonna have a vertical-based system as well, numbers going up is a part of the fun. That's why 14 needs way more horizontal. I like horizontal content. I like a blending of both. I'm hopeful that my feedback is heard. That I hope that if New World, in year 2 or 3, like, they don't need to go to level 70. At least not now. They could wait 5 or 6 years and then say, hey, we're going to 70, because then that gives you 5 or 6 years of level 60 content, making the game bigger, not making the game taller. And then you can make the game a little bit taller, and then you can make it bigger. Taller?
Nope. The moment it adds level 70, it doesn't matter how long it's been. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years. The moment you add 10 new levels to it, everything that is a concurrently game matters less. Everything. Because he's explaining it as somebody that's been playing since beta and has been experiencing that whole 5 years. But somebody who downloads Final Fantasy XIV today, nothing prior to Endwalker truly matters. It matters if they say it matters, but as far as BIS, as far as this conversation, it doesn't matter. You need to be level 90 in the current raid's gear. As a matter of fact, when we go into 6.2 raids, the 6.0 raids don't matter. And when the 6.4 raids get here, the 6.2 raids don't matter. Nothing matters for BIS but what is best. The moment there's verticality added to New World, everything below that new point doesn't matter. There is no, we're going to balance lateral by having a lot of lateral and then vertical. The moment there is vertical, that is all that matters. Guild Wars is not a lateral game because they waited to expand the level cap. They are a lateral game because they have never increased the level cap.
A little bit bigger, but it's like what you end up seeing is that in the WoW model, it's like taller, 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 taller. 14, taller, taller, taller. So it's like, oh, we got 10 new dungeons. No, not really. Like, still running 2.
I mean, people in the chat are saying that in New World, crafting the Biz is not easy at all. That it's very difficult. So
yeah, it is.
I mean, that if that is the case, then maybe it could be like another progression pathway. That makes sense.
One of the things I want to kind of hit on here is that just it seems like what Zepla's saying is the assumption that you want to do absolutely everything in the game. Like maybe you want to craft. Like I don't craft, but I'll gather and I might dabble in crafting. I like the crafting and refining systems, but that's where it's like I'm not the one man god killing machine. It's not the Brian show. It's actually I'm just kind of a part of the bigger picture here. I'm a part in this giant play as opposed to the star where it all begins and ends, you know? And so it's like the idea here is that, yeah, it is hard to craft. And if that's something that was exciting for me, like that's awesome that I have that option, but I could also do hands down things. Like Mike says, that's an argument that makes sense to prove too much. It's not that you have to work to get it, or even that the path is more work. The issue is that when the game is built on various avenues, 2 progression locks BID behind one kind of content made for one kind of play style. Morgurner says that raises the question of how were you able to raise the money to get to using that BIS? How much time went into raising the funds to buy that, which contrasted the time to work for the drop of the successful raid? Like the time in which that you choose to engage, to where you want to spend your time, where you want to waste your time. You want to challenge yourself at hard content today? Great. But like that content from a power perspective, we can separate the trophy from the power, right? I think what people get upset about, what they think I'm arguing for is that the trophy is the power. And that's, I find that absurd. There can be a trophy.
And that's fine. That's why Ultimate is glamour only. That's why the WoW Mage Tower and WoW Pandaria challenge modes are held on high among the community. That's why Final Fantasy XIV loves the solo 200 clears. That's so having the trophy be the power. It doesn't have to be, right? Criterion gives could offer cosmetic only rewards, and I think people would be more okay with it if it had offered its own unique glows or something really cool behind Criterion Savage. There was a lack of rewards that frustrated people, not what the rewards were. It was that Savage really didn't do anything. So it can be cosmetic only, but that doesn't change the core problem here that there is BIS. Now, there is an argument that BIS is only BIS until somebody finds a way to challenge it. That has to do with build variety. So if you add a lot of builds to a game, action RPGs are really common with this. Games like Wolcen, Path of Exiles, or Diablo. Because there is so many ways to build, it is very hard to find the mathematical BIS because the devs didn't find it either. Nobody found it. And so as people continue to challenge it, but there's still a BIS, we're just continuing to math it out. So it's not that BIS changed, it's that we haven't found it yet. And every time we find something that hits a higher number, that is the new BIS, and the old BIS is no longer BIS. It's not, they added another level of BIS. No. The new thing that does more damage in less time is better, until we find something that does even more damage in less time. And then that's it. BIS is BIS is BIS. Those systems are not adding personal BIS. BIS is BIS is BIS. And if you don't want to engage in that, that's fine. But it is mathematically best. If you don't want to play Zelda Breath of the Wild for a speed run, then don't. But don't sit here and tell me that it's all about personal speed runs and that replaces speed runs. No, it doesn't. The people with the fastest time cleared it the fastest, period. Just because you don't engage in that is fine. Just because I don't go run in organized 5Ks and get ranked doesn't mean that my time is not rankable.
But in a world where you can just glamour and you can transmog and you can just change your look at the drop of a hat, what's really the trophy? I think MMOs need to figure that out. What is the trophy? Because right now I think they've lazily dipped into just making the trophy the power. And then people then say, "Oh, but you don't need it." But why not? Why can't I go and grind, endless amounts of mobs, take the materials, refine them, make some money, and then it's like, turns out that piece of gear gives me a little bit more power, makes all that more efficient. It's the pinnacle raid content that does frustrate me. That idea that this is the only thing that people should be enjoying.
If you make it sellable, all that moves the bar to is whoever has the most money becomes the most powerful. That's all that it changes it to. Not who has the most skill, or it's literally just who has the most money. Which I will tell you, in games that have chosen to go down that route, if they have a credit card swipe ability, then it becomes who has the most real-world money they're willing to spend wins. And if they don't go down that route, it's who has the most optimal farming. And usually optimal farming is about understanding systems and doing the thing that most people want done that are not willing to do. And so if everybody wants, let's say, linen cloth, and linen cloth is available from something really boring, whoever finds a way to get the most linen cloth per hour will be the wealthiest. And it results in a lot of really goofy bending of loot rules and mob drop rules and killing rules until there are optimized farms. And you can try to nerf those farms out of existence until all farms are down at the baseline you set, or you can leave those farms in existence and they are just the best. But either way, whoever has the most money is the most powerful. If you set it to economy, all you've done is move the bar. So you can either have BIS locked behind the people that have achieved the most, or you can have BIS by the people who have the most. But, like, it doesn't change the fact that BIS is BIS, which has been the continual point here. All you're moving is how people get it.
Frustrates me. I think it should exist, but I don't like that the power, the progression is locked behind it. You can still lock trophies behind it for sure. You can still lock BIS behind it. But then you have to have the build system. You have to have flexibility. You got to let people play the way they want to play. And then essentially you could end up getting something, again, from a stats perspective, you're like, yeah, this is great. Maybe I don't have that exact perk. Like, being that the gear is so flat, it's like, come on.
Do we need a global chat in Final Fantasy? No, we don't.
gear is
I'm thinking
flat,
about
unfortunately.
Novice Network right now and what a cesspool it is.
Teaming up more naturally than ever before. And
One of the weirdest things is that, like, Final Fantasy XIV used to be way more social in its game and in its chat, but then moderation came in and everybody kind of got a lot quieter. You got a lot quieter. My wife was bullied before they put that system in place in 14. And I'm glad that in a way that they did, because it makes the experience way more enjoyable. So business-wise, I understand it. But overall, less chat, it feels way more isolated.
In fact, just today, somebody was saying that, healing Stone Vigil hard was a lot harder than healing an Expert Roulette at max level.
Yeah, some of the, our Unveil and some of the lower level dungeons are still some of the hardest dungeons in the game.
The Expert doesn't really feel expert. I feel like that's valid. I do feel like that is valid. At least an Expert Roulette should feel maybe a little bit more challenging than it is. You think a reward for failure? Not okay.
So you're not rewarded for failure. You're rewarded entirely along the way. So you have the ability to get loot and materials, which all tie into the economy, which tie into all these things, right? So all this is interrelated.
He hit on that before, and as I went back and watched some of his dungeon clears, what he's talking about are chests that you get mid-dungeon, which is actually something that Final Fantasy does do. And when he talks about at the highest level, that is not different than people who are only clearing P5 each week, but are not yet clearing P6 each week. So I actually don't know that Final Fantasy offers something different than what he's saying. This idea that partial completion is rewarded is actually present the way he's talking about. I thought at first when he said it wasn't, but as I've gone back and listened to this more, I think it's still covered.
But even if you don't clear the boss, you still have gotten things and like items, materials. You actually could get some expertise bumps, etc. Like, so it is actually very rewarding just for stepping in and attempting it. So you do that, you throw yourself in, you make some progress, you learn the fights. You know what? Maybe we're just not ready for it tonight. It's okay. It allows the dungeons to hit you back as a part of just being like, all right, you're here. Okay, maybe you wipe once and never again. No, the dungeons in this game, they slap. They're so good. They're so freaking good.
Have you played Mentor Roulette? There's like if you want a dungeon where there's
roulettes and matchmaking for PvE.
On this event server I've been playing on with Brian, there are absolutely people doing dungeon clears. So it's not that they don't always, like, you can still out level them. So like it's still the same. It's still the same. It just, I haven't got to try the mutator system yet, so we'll get to see how that compares to Criterion, Mythic Plus, and Fractals. But at base level dungeons, they are designed to be cleared. They are designed to be cleared. And I was in there with people, and It was whether or not they could like not get hit by a laser beam. Like I was still waiting on people, and it just, I don't actually know that dungeons are moving dungeons forward in an MMO. I think Final Fantasy XIV does not use its base dungeon system very effectively. Neither does Guild Wars 2. So they use them as narrative scenarios that are done in groups. They're not used in a way that challenges you mechanically, and that's not to say you can't die, but they are not something that moves the player base forward mechanically. But I hesitate to say that I don't know that New World's winning in that category yet. I'm not far enough. I think it's that Final Fantasy XIV is losing. When I was growing up, we had a pool table, and there was this idea that if you hit the 8-ball in, the other person didn't win, you lost. And that's how I feel about Final Fantasy on the subject of regular dungeons. That Final Fantasy does not leverage its regular dungeons well enough. And so New World might be better simply because it didn't make the same mistake, not because New World did something so groundbreaking.
Content for as much as people say they like them, it's such a huge cost. We lose player agency. We lose player-driven choice. We lose difficult, challenging content. Party finders, yes. Matchmaking, absolutely not.
No guarantee.
With the exception of PvP. Nobody gives a crap. PvP, find me a match, let's go.
With the BIS argument, I know we're going back.
That's not true. PvP doesn't matter to Brian. So once again, he says who cares, like he's been saying that, but like, let's go back and listen to that again. This is dismissive as well.
PvE content for as much as people say they like them, it's such a huge cost. We lose player agency. We lose player-driven choice. We lose difficult, challenging
But there are people that love it. There are people that love it.
Content. Party finders, yes. Matchmaking, absolutely not.
No guarantee.
With the exception of PvP. Nobody gives a...
Nope. That's exactly the same. Matchmaking in PvP versus party finders in PvP do all the same things. As a matter of fact, that's why we can't have party finders in PvP, because PvP you actually get to hurt somebody else's experience as opposed to PvP you don't. And so if you allow for party finders to go in and have pre-made teams on ranked Crystalline Conflict, it will remove the ability to be in Crystalline Conflict as a non-team person. So actually it's exactly the opposite. So like, matchmaking is the same across all content. It allows people to get into content quicker in trade for not getting to choose who you go with. The question is, if you get to choose who you go with, do you hurt anybody else? And if you don't, then we allow manual groups to exist. And if they want to go in some games, they allow you to go in under-leveled or below certain gear scores. In some games, they don't. Some games, they allow you to mess with the composition. Some games, that's a little more restricted. And so letting people kind of choose their own journey as long as they're not hurting anybody else is where things like matchmaking form. That is where metas actually form, is when people realize that they can do something better. But in PvP, he's saying he doesn't care, right? Just who cares? Let people go. Who cares is people who care about PvP. And there are people who take PvP very, very, very seriously. And to those people, they do care. Brian and I don't typically care about PvP in MMORPGs, so we don't mind matchmaking because we don't mind if we win or lose. But to people that do mind, that's incredibly hurtful.
Crap. PvP, find me a match, let's go.
With the BIS argument, I know we're going back a little bit, but on the BIS thing, he said that it's good that the crafters can craft the BIS for people to buy.
Yep.
Is that what he's doing? Like, is that what he wants to do? Like, what would he want to do ideally for getting BIS? Like, does he want to raid for that?
I would like to have the choice between doing the raids, doing crafting and gathering, beating crazy big bosses, supplying the market. I've raided, and I'm all right. You beat it. What then? Why do it? Why keep throwing yourself at it? That's where the economy adds value to that, because if there's materials that you can get from that content, and then the market has a demand for it, there's a demand for doing the content. So yeah, I want to jump into a raid. Want to check out, like I see Chris talking about how the new Criterion dungeons slap. Like that'd be great. I'm not going to play them anymore, but it's great that they're finally introducing that. I would like to have seen, and I'm hopeful that maybe they do this, is where maybe the pathways for the Criterion change, like, on some kind of, time-based schedule to kind of account for the variance piece of the, kind of what it's rooted on, but maybe one day.
Like a relic. Because FF14, like, the closest thing that we would have to what I think he's...
The thing, and now she's going to trigger me, is that the relics, which become BIS for a couple of weeks, maybe a month and a half, are replaced. And it would be so beautiful and poetic if they could bring those back, the past relics, and allow you to fuse them, bring them up to the same power level, and have them unique to the content. This ties back into what I wish Final Fantasy XIV did is instead of having the raid dictate the entirety of the game and its balance, you siloed the raid, where you could say, yeah, these relics, you know, like you get them and you could keep powering them up, and they have these cool unique traits that only these weapons have. Oh man, these are great. Yeah, they're gonna be hard to get. You can go invest them, et cetera, and you can't take them to the raids. Okay, fair enough, right? Like, we don't want to balance the raids around all this, you know, possibility, but that's where you would and should make the raids siloed as opposed to like the entire game. Like,
just to be abundantly clear for anybody who's never had a relic that is on the current maximum tier of progression, if you are entering Savage for the very first time and you have the maximum ranked relic at the time that you enter Savage, or you have crafted gear, because he is a proponent of crafted gear and he's a proponent of self-earned gear. So if you have the relic and you have pentamelted crafted gear for the current raid tier, you are incredibly well geared, especially if you only want to do the first or second fight of Savage. Why would you keep doing the first or second fight of Savage? Because that is going to drop gear that is going to help you do the third and fourth fight of Savage. Ryan did not make it into the third or fourth fight of Savage, but that's the answer to his question. What is it for? To get you to even more of this. The third and fourth fight are clearable with that, but that requires a higher skill level, and the gear that you get from the first and second fight over and over and over will help lower that amount of difficulty. It'll help just nerf it just a little bit. People have a little more life, people have a little more damage. The third and fourth fight become more and more and more manageable the more weeks of first and second fight we have. So to answer his question, why would you get the relic until it's BIS? Why is crafted gear not good enough for raiding? Is because it is. If you have fully pentamelted gear, you have the current up-to-date relic, you are raid relevant. You are absolutely raid relevant. You can clear the first and second fight easily through just playing better. After you clear the first and second fight, there is a step up in difficulty, and you can either play a lot better, or you can now go in and farm the first and second fight over and over to reward back on that. As a matter of fact, when you go back to old content, because of how it's statted, the old gear that is easily acquirable through dungeons that were added after that ultimate, or relics, or things like that, now become the BIS to go into old ultimates. So, if you are willing to wait until an ultimate is older, which since Brian and I have both never cleared an ultimate, that means we have 4 ultimates available to us right now. We could pick any of the first 3 ultimates added to the game. We could easily go acquire BIS by doing old content that would be highly relevant, and then we could go work through that content now. And so that effectively means even the only content in Final Fantasy XIV that is truly gear gated, the only content that is truly gear gated and can never be done in an unsynced, overgeared mode, is actually just a large-scale version of time gated. There is nothing in this game that he cannot do with crafted gear, with the exception of ultimate, and even then, it's just a matter of time. If he's willing to wait until the next ultimate drops, he can always go do that in now craftable gear. So crafters are absolutely relevant in this way. If his goal is to clear all the content in the game, and he's willing to sometimes be working on backlog content versus current content, it is already true. It is already true.
I got 1 relic. Cool. Like, I used it for a month. Okay.
Because you didn't get it until the last month. He got 1 relic and he used it for the last month of the expansion because he did not get it until there was a month to go. 0.55 actually launches well in advance of a month of the expansion, so if he was already relic capped going into 0.55, he would have had it much sooner than 1 month out. And actually, I have the best relic right now the moment the relic became available, and it is very good. If I didn't want to have the tome gear, it's good. It's good. It is the 3rd best weapon in the game. It is more than good enough to clear all current content. All current content that is available in Final Fantasy XIV today is clearable with the raid with the relic I have right now. And when that relic gets upgradable, it will go back into that state. It will have slipped out of that state and it will go right back in. So what he's asking for does exist. It just does not exist in a way that he chooses to engage with it. And that's okay. But I think what I'm struggling with here is that he's saying it in a way where here are things that Final Fantasy does not offer that New World does. And really it's, here are things that New World offers in a way that I'm willing to do them, and Final Fantasy offers them in a way that I'm not willing to do them. They do exist. They do exist, just not in a way that he's willing to do. And you should never play a game in a way you are not willing to.
Describing would be the relic journey, where you need to grind out a shitload of materials for your relic weapon over the course of an expansion. Now, we just have our first step right now in the game, so it's not all there yet. It will only be there at the end of the expansion.
I'm right here.
But at the end of the expansion, it will be Abyss weapon that you grinded for. So is this like that, but for every piece of armor?
My frustration with that vertical.
Not just the weapon in New World?
Final Fantasy 14 definitely with Crystal Lake Conflict.
I'd be fine if they, like, when they released the expansion, that's when that was the gear cap. Like, you put the gear cap of where it's going to be at the end of the expansion, and you make that gear cap like insanely difficult to get to at the start of the expansion, and maybe that eases up overall. But these hard walls where there's just like, all right, I did it, and then essentially, you know, that would be an interesting system. I wouldn't mind seeing in 14.
Like, wins that mode, and if they ever brought some,
I also would like to hear, what is attractive about this for him? That's another question that pops in my head. So if you don't want to craft it and you don't want to raid for it, which I'm not sure, if he does just want to grind for it to get the best, then why?
He doesn't actually like grinding either. He didn't cap in Eureka. He didn't like following that through. He doesn't cap bicolored gemstones. He doesn't cap his tomes every week. Brian doesn't. I don't even believe he caps all of his tribal quests. He doesn't have a lot of the grindy achievements in game. So Brian doesn't like grinding, Brian doesn't like crafting, and Brian doesn't like raiding. So just to expound on our point, all of those things within Final Fantasy XIV, based on the evidence of his actions, do not appeal to Brian.
Like, what do you want to use it for?
Progression? Building out my build? Having fun playing the content that I'm playing? I don't know. It just seems like a natural thing to want. And if it takes me, and it will take me longer than it will take most people, I've always said I won't be first, but I'll chip away at it, you know?
Yeah, I don't think he caps tribal quests, especially that are crafters and gatherers. I think he passes on those, so I don't think he caps on all the tribal quests in every expansion. So what does he do then? Brian likes leveling bars. He likes filling bars. And so if we open up this here, Brian likes seeing the bars fill, and after the bar fills, he moves on to another bar. If it weren't for the controller guides, a lot of classes that he capped, he would never touch again. So he fills these bars, and then he's done. And so once he fills bars, that's it. And so he logs in for the purpose of grinding completion. The act of completing is that dopamine hit for him. And so in New World, if I go and check New World crafting skills, let me grab an image because I don't have the game booted and that'll take too long. In New World, there are a lot of bars. And so there's all these bars to fill. And once they fill, my understanding, I don't have any of mine at 200 yet, so I don't have any of mine capped. My understanding is once they fill, you can keep circling them. You can keep circling them. And you can run them around and around and around and around and around and around and around. And there are a lot of things that help level them, as opposed to tribal quests require that you do specifically what those tribal quests ask. I don't think he caps his desynth. And so desynth has bars, but it's a real pain. So like getting the Carpenter and Alchemist desynth bar, any of you that have that above, let's say 540, touche. You are a hero, a god among mere mortals. So touche. But the act of, like, so he likes filling bars. And so what it would help him do is it would help him fill bars.
Problem is also when that goal line moves faster than I can chip away at it, it's like, well, why bother?
So some of the points were a little bit unclear to me, but I do still appreciate him making this video, even though I feel like there were some points that...
And remember, in Final Fantasy XIV, he could be playing just for story, right? You don't have to play that much per patch cycle to stay relatively caught up with the community. So he could just play for story.
Where I didn't understand.
It kind of does feel like that, but that's also, again, trying to find a word that doesn't trigger people because it's the internet. I guess you can't please everybody. This is kind of this culture, right? Like they've been trained on WoW. 14 adopted that. So it's like you kind of get trained, and this is essentially like, oh, this is what we all do. And it's like, well, there
14 is way different than WoW, by the way. 14 is way different than WoW.
are other ways of going about it. And then it's like
as much as it had a similar origin point, the things we've talked about today, when we talk about BIS, when we talk about retention mechanics, when we talk about the highest end content, when we talk about the number of things you can do within game and the number of ways that there are player interactions and how those are fostered through both matchmaking and party finder, he is literally talking about all of the areas minus story where Final Fantasy distinguishes itself from World of Warcraft. They have a lot in common, but the subjects he's talked about today are many of the areas where Final Fantasy is most distinct from World of Warcraft.
what? It's like, you want to play a game different from how we, like, why don't you want to, spend all your time and do all this stuff? It's like, well, maybe I do. And sometimes maybe I don't. Like, that's the appeal of what makes, I think, an MMO. Just a wide range of things that you can do. There's a guy in this game, in New World, that like all he does is fish. He just fishes. And he challenges himself to the most ludicrous fishing. He's in a race on how he can get his fishing expertise, which there's not a cap on. Awesome.
So in Final Fantasy XIV, there are people that push this stuff. Ash 10 has like a ridiculous number of free companies pushing up their submarines and ridiculous stuff. There are people that do things like Rin Karagani doing the tank cob. In World of Warcraft, there's an entire community that has built out things around transmog farms, mini pet battling, whole ways to play. There is RP in any of these games. So when you start to name one example of somebody who's playing differently and how that is something to be championed, that is present in every game. Like if you're going to take a game with millions of players and you're going to say one guy is playing different and that is our champion, that's true in every game. Every game. So if this whole video is meant to help give context on what she is failing to understand as a non-New World player Brian made a video about the 5 things that make him choose New World over Final Fantasy XIV. Zepla reacted to that as somebody who has never played New World and it has not appealed to her. Brian is now reacting to that to help give context to the things that she misses about New World. Some of the examples he's using, like the fact that there's one random guy doing something in New World and that is something that makes New World unique, are simply not unique. They just aren't. Josh Strafe Hayes tells a whole story about one guy that decided to beat a boss in a weird way in RuneScape.
And he can make money, and he can gear himself up, and he can do these things. And guess what? Because you have perks and you have best BIS fishing stuff. Everybody thinks BIS about the raid. F the raid.
What?
Fishes. And he challenges himself to the most ludicrous fishing. He's in a race on how he can get his fishing expertise, which there's not a cap on. Awesome. And he can make money, and he can gear himself up, and he can do these things. And guess what? Because you have perks and you have best BIS fishing stuff. Everybody thinks BIS about the raid. F the raid. F that culture. Player choice. You want to raid? Raid. You want to supply the raiders? Supply the raiders. You want to go have some kind of passive asynchronous multiplayer stuff? Great. There's so many really good ideas in MMOs and we haven't seen anybody taking the risks. I feel like New World takes those risks. And I'm hoping Ashes succeeds in its risk as well. BIS in a fish, baby. Let's freaking go.
And the comparison being made between 14 and New World, like how they were really and truly very distinct.
Be better, Brian, man. You're one of my closest, longest, oldest friends. Be better. Be better. Be better. Like I don't know if he's done any of these, but there is a whole system in any MMO. Josh Strife Hayes had a whole video about why fishing is required, where you go in here, you go down to fishing, and you look at this. These are all the things you can do within fishing, and there's an entire system around going and collecting high quality fish and then going and catching the big fish. Big fish are a real pain, man. They really are. And I can hop over here onto my fisher, where my fisher has its own abilities. I have gear. I pentameld that gear, and I chase that, and I can craft it. My entire inventory is clogged right now because I need to update myself to the new BIS, which I'm going to do via crafting instead of engaging in the quest style system because I don't want the script gear. I want to craft my own gear, and crafting is relevant. All the things he's talking about, everything he's talking about exists. You don't want to play this game, that's fine. But if you're going to use examples of the reason that New World is different than Final Fantasy XIV, please, for the love of God, make sure that they are different than Final Fantasy XIV.
Distinct from each other, or where I didn't understand what it was that he was seeking out in New World specifically, like with the case of BIS. Now, with PvP, I can't really speak to that. I'm not very experienced with PvP in this game, besides getting Crystal in Season 1. Like, not to flex or anything. But I didn't really touch it much after the first series, so I sort of pieced out for now. But everything else, like the economy argument, didn't make a lot of sense to me, because I think that the game does have a player-driven economy.
Oh, 14 does not.
Guild matters to some degree to buy
See.
stuff that's just more convenient for you to buy rather than go.
And she just then, you know, like in her mind, she doesn't understand it, but it matters to some degree. And I said it in my player-driven economy video. There are no perfect systems. There's no utopian MMO out there. There's going to be downsides. Player-driven economies have their downsides. You have to regulate and you have to monitor, because bots and cheaters, like, they can ruin that. That's why I think the fresh start servers are so popular right now, because it's like, oh yeah, all that stuff. People even just being afraid that they're going to be at a disadvantage from other people. I get it. As Ayler says, 14 has a great economy in your opinion. What do you like about that? What do you like? What does gold get you? What does guild get you that makes it worth going after? Yeah, Chris says, I don't raid for the gear. I raid for the bosses. Challenge myself against the hardest fights. Yeah, and that's awesome. That's exactly why you should raid. But in 14, they lock power progression behind it. And that's where that's where I'm going to be frustrated. And there's no counter argument to me not being frustrated by that. Especially because it's a stat stick, especially because it's like people just override the trophy log. You can buy gear while leveling up, particularly catch up gear when the new raid drops. Okay. So that's so Gil has a use for you right now once every 8 months. And then you just stockpile it. Like,
I mean, depending on how much you play for Gil, every 8 months, if you're always buying the new BIS, I don't know how much Brian paid for his, but I crafted mine, and then I bought some materials that were like locked behind like tomes and stuff I didn't want to go grind, but I grinded a lot of my own materials, and then I bought all my materia. But I did it week 1. So to get full battle system BIS, not crafter or gatherer BIS, I ended up kind of going through the crafter stuff to make mine. So because I had to update my crafting set to get to BIS, I think total in week 1, I spent about 12 million gil between getting crafter BIS so I could craft my own battle BIS. I spent about 12 million gil. And for a lot of players, to have 12 million gil built up every 8 months is a challenge. For some players, they make 12 million gil in a week or 2 weeks. But depending on how you engage with the economy in Final Fantasy XIV, but as soon as you get above that 12 million, as soon as you have 20 million, 30 million, it ends up just kind of being a big pile, and it ends up not really mattering. It's why we've done guild giveaways here on the channel. I've given away 30 million some odd guild this year. And because guild doesn't matter. I've got a goal next year to get my guild up to a big number, because that'll make guild matter. But it's because I'm artificially setting a number that I'm chasing. Just for the sake of chasing it. So I'm making guild matter because I said it matters, and when we get to that goal, I could have a stream and give it all away, and then I could just set the number again. Like, it doesn't matter. So a lot of what he's arguing for, what makes the economy good in Final Fantasy XIV is people who do not want the economy to be the be-all, end-all. If you only want to extract things from the economy when you don't want to do them, but you don't want to have to constantly engage in the economy to remain economy relevant, as inflation takes over and things like that, as you get kind of bought out of the economy. If somebody has 1 billion gil and you only have 10 million gil and you both want the same item, they're going to outbid you every time. And the person listing it is going to know that. So they're going to list it for more gil than you even have. So not having a strong economy has allowed 14 to make sure that everybody can engage with it very, very, very casually. And that people who engage with it incredibly hardcore, like Ash 10, all they really get out of it is a high score. He doesn't gain anything. So like when you say, why do people like the 14 economy? It's because it is incredibly casual. That's the advantage. It's a wild advantage. It's a wild advantage. Obviously, he can see the disadvantages, and I think he's spoken to those very clearly. But if you're wondering what the advantage is, what's the other side of that? Not everybody wants to have to cap gil to be able to buy raid-relevant gear. Brian's enjoying making gold in New World, and so things costing gold is no big deal. And as the total cost for things goes up, that's no big deal, because he's enjoying the act of getting gold. But if you don't enjoy the act of getting currency, having everybody else engage in a currency system that chases itself to the highest and wealthiest player is not fun, because it leaves you behind.
There are better ways, and there are more things that system could do. Now, it's not going to work in 14. Like, we have gone past their ability to go and do this without them absolutely frustrating a lot of players. And at the same time, like, you would have to design this core aspect from the ground up, because in a silo, it doesn't work. A player-driven economy in a silo ends up just feeling like you're just doing extra work and you don't know why. But when you take in all the 5 points that I make, how player-driven economies have the ability to connect us, raid culture like has that, like, you go farm the raid, not just to beat the bosses because you can, because you're actually providing a service for the economy. And it doesn't always even have to be tied to power, right? But also then you take into account that materials, like even low-level materials, like all these things have a value. So even a low-level player is participating. Final Fantasy XI's endgame began at level 1. New World's endgame begins at level 1. Everything you're doing has an impact. It doesn't mean it's got to be the greatest impact, but it all is connected as opposed to siloed. And I think maybe that's the best way I can kind of summarize.
I mean, there are things that are siloed in New World. Just to be clear, there are absolutely types of content you are not allowed to engage in until you're high enough level. There are areas you cannot go to until you are high enough level. Like if you go there, you'll just die. You won't do anything meaningful. So on stream during the New World event, I ran to areas I didn't belong in, but all I could do is run there. And so it is absolutely gated. Just to go back and kind of counterpoint that for anybody who hears it and thinks, oh, I'll just go into New World and be level 1. No. You're going to want a level. But what he is describing is that you are obtaining items that are relevant or for an early level. And in Final Fantasy, if you go out and gather things from Lenosha, they are not valuable to the current economy. That is only true until the day that New World decides to increase the level. If they ever up the cap to 70, if they ever up the gear score, then everything in the current system that does not funnel into those, if they do not require current materials in crafting, that item will now be worthless. That item will now be worthless. If the boards ever update their quests so they no longer call for firm fish fillets, then the price of firm fish fillets will plummet. They are only relevant for as long as they are relevant. New World is a year old. During A Realm Reborn, we were in A Realm Reborn zones farming up meaningful things while we were below level cap that had value. What changed is not Final Fantasy XIV as a whole, it's that they added something new that became better. And the day New World does that, it's over. And Brian said earlier that could be 2 years, 5 years, it's an amount of time. No. The reason that is not true in Guild Wars is because it never went back and added something that is objectively better. That Tyria is still a perfectly valid way to play. The moment New World decides to increase level cap or increase anything like that, all the previous stuff runs the risk of becoming irrelevant. And it will be incredibly delicate how they handle that to avoid that. So what he is comparing is a new MMO to a veteran MMO. That is what he's comparing. Once you're an Endwalker, that's it. So are new players in Final Fantasy getting anything relevant? Has Final Fantasy dropped the ball? Yes, they absolutely are. Final Fantasy XIV at this point has gone in and changed their new player experience to be entirely story-driven. And as you do the story, you are given an incredible amount of gil. You are given something like 2 million gil. And right now, as of today, I could go buy best in slot gear for probably 1 million gil. So if I run up to the top, let's talk about, are new players in Final Fantasy XIV given anything relevant to endgame? And the answer, I believe, is yes. Now, unfortunately, they're forced to do story to do it, and if you don't like story content, I don't know what to tell you. If you like story content, that's great. Are there reasons to play Final Fantasy XIV besides story content? Yes. Can you get to any of those reasons without doing story content? No. But if we jump over here and we go to, it doesn't matter, a chest piece, and we go to the highest chest piece in the game, let me change over to a battle job so it auto filters for me. And I come in here and I go to a chest piece, and I go to the highest thing in the game. 29 million for that seems ridiculous. Here we go. 89,000 gil. And if I want it with materia, it's 1 million gil. 888 to 89,000. A new player, by the time they hit cap, can buy 2 of these pieces right from the get-go, assuming they sold nothing on the market board. That's raw gil that was given them. If they sell everything that they got along the way, which is a bunch of random crap, it's a bunch of random little crest rewards, maybe they got a bunch of random cloth, and some of this cloth, it's not valuable, and some of the other cloth, it is valuable, and so it'll depend on how much money they made, but it is not uncommon for a new player to have made 5 or even 10 million gil by the time they hit cap, which is enough to buy their first set, or at least a portion of their first set, to get into current content. And then from there, they're just like everybody else. So is it relevant? Yes. Is it relevant in the same way that New World is? No. But is that because of something Final Fantasy does intrinsic to compared to New World? We don't know yet, because New World has not added its first expansion. Tell me that New World adds its first expansion and does not increase the level cap or anything that makes current low-level zones irrelevant, and then we'll talk about it. But Brimstone Sands is a base expansion patch. We do not yet have our first implemented expansion to know whether or not New World is going to present itself as a primarily vertical or a primarily horizontal MMO. So it is too soon to call that point for either game.
All that up together. I'm gonna let Zepla see if she has any final thoughts on it, and then we will finish wrapping.
And when watching the video, I thought
That piece I clicked on that was worth ornate something different. I just misclicked.
wow, it'd be really great if he could say why he wants to go to New World instead, just from like a almost an academic perspective. I'm interested in what it has that FF14 doesn't have, because I talk about FF14 almost literally every single day.
All right, I think that's that. Switch back to the other view. Thanks, guys, for hanging out with me for that. Well, guys, that was long. Let's wrap up this long recording here. Anyhow, to sum up, obviously, we were talking about 2 different styles and approaches. Ultimately, what is an MMO? What are the cohesive natures of it? What is your route? What was your entry point into that? All these things are going to be things that we might not never agree on because of that. But, you know, yeah, invitation is out. We'll see if we can get a hold of Zepla if I can't sit down for a one-on-one with her, because there is a beauty in what the MMO could be, and hopefully what we see it become back again. I'm excited for the future of new MMOs. They're going to struggle no matter what, and you're going to see the same BS that you see with all the people kind of cheering them and their demise, which is a weird thing if you like MMOs, because you should, you know, you should hope that people make good things and that good ideas flow to the surface. But that's going to be it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this long discussion and conversation. Hopefully Zepla and I can get together on a podcast.
I think Brian and I just fundamentally disagree on a lot of this. I agree with Brian on a lot of things, but I think we fundamentally disagree here. So I think a lot of this was really clear. It's what I've always enjoyed about the discussion. Brian's working a lot this month, and so we haven't had a chance to do a lot of these discussions, so this has been a fun way to do it. I get incredibly frustrated when, because I'm reacting, I can't stop Brian and say, but Final Fantasy has gear for fishers, and you can go be an exclusively fisher main if you want. You can. You absolutely can. You'll have to clear the story first because Final Fantasy made that mandatory, but like that was a choice of Final Fantasy. And you can story skip. I'm living proof. So, you know, I don't disagree that there are differences about New World and Final Fantasy. I don't disagree that each of those differences has its own unique pros and cons. What I disagree with are some of the areas that he's saying New World is objectively better when A, it's not objective, and B, some of the things he's arguing for are present in Final Fantasy. Like fishing, like the fact that crafting gear is relevant, like the fact that new players do provide something valuable to the economy. I just disagree with some of the areas where, like, he is trying to point out why New World is better, and it's not better or worse because the games are effectively the same. Alright. What he's liking about New World is that it's new. And that's okay. It's fun to play new things. I'm playing Call of Duty right now. I'm level 46 out of 55. I think Call of Duty games typically are not the best of the shooters. What am I liking about it? It's 10 new maps and a bunch of new guns. It's just new. Do I think it's a better game than Halo 5? Not a chance. I have Halo 5 installed on my Xbox, and I have Call of Duty installed on my Xbox. What did I play last night, the night before, and what will I play tonight after stream? Call of Duty. And I will play it tomorrow, and I will play it Friday, and by Friday I expect to be level 55, but I'll probably play it Saturday and Sunday. 7 days a week right now I am making time for Call of Duty. Why? Because it's new. And I think a lot of what he's saying boils down to it's new. What I love about this is nobody knows what's happening, so there's not a best. Yes, there is a best. They just don't know what it is because it's new. Give it time. We'll be in exactly the same spot. I can't even fish on Call of Duty. Ridiculous.